Waitress kisses a millionaire in front of his family. Everyone is stunned by her bold move, but when he learns the reason, he falls to his knees. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Ruby Phillips felt the day's weight pressing on her shoulders as she hurried out of the small diner on Chicago's southwest side. She had just finished a 4-hour morning shift, wiping down sticky tables and refilling coffee cups for regulars who barely noticed her. She lived in a perpetual rush, always out of breath, always worried about what lay ahead. Taking the bus toward the city center, she clutched her worn-out purse against her side, trying to gather the resolve she needed for her second job at Bellini's. Stepping off the bus in front of an elegant brick building, Ruby paused at the glass doors of the restaurant. Bellini's, famous for its refined cuisine and upscale clientele, felt like another universe compared to the greasy diner she'd just left. She inhaled deeply, brushed an errant strand of her wavy brown hair behind her ear, and reminded herself to keep smiling, no matter how exhausted she felt. Inside, the space gleamed with polished floors and white tablecloths. Soft jazz played in the background, lending an ambiance of sophistication that sometimes made Ruby feel she was intruding on a world where she didn't belong. Martin Rodriguez, the restaurant's fastidious manager, spotted Ruby immediately. He was a tall man in his early 40s, always in a tailored suit, always scanning the room for potential errors. He tapped a clipboard against his palm as she approached. "You're late," he said, eyes narrowing behind designer glasses. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez," Ruby answered, breathless. "The bus was delayed, but I'm here now." Without another word, he handed her a list of tables. "Section B is yours. We have a VIP reservation tonight, so keep your focus and no mistakes." Ruby nodded, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. She needed this job far too much to risk any confrontation. She rushed to the staff room, swapped her coat for a crisp apron, and scanned the mirror. Her reflection revealed signs of fatigue, slight circles under her green eyes, tension in her jaw, but her determination remained. Her shift had barely begun, and she was already thinking ahead to the tips she needed to help pay next month's bills. The late afternoon lull provided a moment's calm before the usual dinner crowd arrived. She filled water glasses and refolded napkins, all the while worrying about her mother's increasing medical expenses and her younger sister Ashley's college fees. Ashley was 22 now, studying nursing at a community college. Ruby still remembered how terrified she'd been a decade ago when Ashley nearly drowned at a lake. A stranger had saved her sister's life, then vanished before the family could offer thanks. Sometimes Ruby wondered if she'd dreamed the whole event. A faint memory of that day drifted into her mind, the splash of water, Ashley's muffled cries for help, and the blur of a figure diving in. Ruby remembered sobbing on the shoreline, convinced she was about to lose her baby sister. Then, in a flash, the stranger had emerged from the water, carrying Ashley to safety. He'd stayed just long enough to see Ashley breathing again. Before anyone could say a proper thank you, he was gone. Ruby often imagined running into him one day, though Chicago was vast and full of people who never met twice. Evening arrived in full swing, and Bellini's began to fill. Expensive perfumes mingled with the aromas of fresh bread and seared fish. The string of overhead lights cast a warm glow on patrons dressed in fashionable suits and dresses, their quiet laughter and clinking silverware creating an atmosphere of privilege. Ruby moved efficiently from table to table, offering a polite smile she'd practiced for years, delivering plates of handcrafted pasta and balancing trays of sparkling wine. Halfway through her shift, Linda Moore, the sous chef in her 50s, caught Ruby's eye. Linda was a comforting presence in the bustling kitchen, a woman who'd weathered her own storms but maintained a tender heart. "You doing okay?" Linda asked as Ruby picked up a tray from the pass. Still standing, Ruby replied with a short laugh. That's got to count for something. Linda smiled sympathetically, then pointed to a dish on the counter. Table 9, she said. Cheerful couple. You'll like them. Ruby headed out with renewed focus. She slid into her routine of cheerful greetings and attentive refills, yet a slight knot in her stomach told her something out of the ordinary was coming. It was a sense she'd developed over the years, an intuitive warning that unexpected events loomed on the horizon. She tried to shake off the feeling by concentrating on details, neatly folding napkins, adjusting silverware, making sure water glasses stayed full. The memory of her sister's near-death experience, however, lingered in the back of her mind. In quieter moments, Ruby found herself thinking about that unknown rescuer and how one selfless act could change so many lives. It left her with a persistent hope that, if she ever met him, she'd say the words of gratitude that had been locked inside her for a decade. Finally, she straightened her apron and forced a smile. There was still a long night ahead, and she couldn't afford to be distracted. Tables were filling up faster now, and with them came the potential for bigger tips that could make a small dent in her overdue bills. No matter what the future held, she intended to face it with the same silent determination that had guided her all these years. The dinner rush had fully set in when Martin approached Ruby with an air of urgency. He held a glossy reservation list in his hand and scanned it as though it were a royal decree. "We've received confirmation for a high-profile party tonight," he said in a low voice that conveyed both excitement and anxiety. "They'll be arriving soon to celebrate a major corporate deal. I need you to be on top of your game." Ruby paused in the middle of restocking fresh bread rolls, her brow furrowing. She rarely got direct assignments from Martin about VIPs, which meant this must be an important group. "I'll handle it," she said, hoping her confidence outweighed the butterflies in her stomach. As if on cue, the entrance doors swung open with a flourish. A tall man in his mid-30s walked in, flanked by a group that exuded wealth and privilege. Ruby's gaze flicked over them, meticulously tailored suits, designer dresses, and expensive watches that seemed to reflect the restaurant's soft lighting. The hostess greeted them with deference, then led them toward a large round table in the center of the dining area. Ruby's heart pounded as she approached, pen and order pad in hand. At first glance, the man leading the party seemed both imposing and strangely familiar. He had sharp features, an athletic build, and a confident stride. Yet there was something in his eyes, a reflective quality that suggested he was not entirely comfortable in his surroundings. She offered her usual polite smile. "Good evening. Welcome to Bellini's. My name is Ruby, and I'll be your server tonight." "May I bring you some drinks to start?" Before anyone replied, a middle-aged woman with a perfectly coiffed hairstyle leaned forward. "Bring us your finest champagne," she said, barely glancing at Ruby. There was a clipped arrogance in her tone, as if issuing a command. "Yes, Mrs. Harrington, of course," the hostess quickly intervened, addressing the woman by name. "We have an excellent vintage in stock." Ruby fought the urge to show surprise. This family was clearly well known, and that name, Harrington, was attached to a legacy of massive corporate dealings in Chicago. Ruby had read about them in business sections of the local paper, especially regarding a major acquisition rumored to finalize soon. The man, presumably their son, settled into his seat but kept a calm demeanor. She noticed he hadn't said a word yet, letting the others speak for him. His gaze moved restlessly around the restaurant, as if looking for an escape hatch. Ruby headed to the bar to place the champagne order, trying to quell a strange sense of recognition. She couldn't quite place it, but the man's face poked at a memory she'd carried around for years. Returning with the drinks, she set them down carefully, aware of the Harrington family's eyes on her. "Tell me, Jackson," said the older gentleman at the table, presumably the patriarch. His voice carried the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. "Are you satisfied with the final terms of the acquisition? We've sacrificed a great deal for this." Jackson Harrington, so that was his name, shifted in his seat, looking momentarily uncomfortable. "It's a big move," he replied quietly. "I'm still reviewing the philanthropic angle to ensure—" He didn't finish, as the older woman cut him off. "Philanthropic angle? That's a fancy term for giving away money without a return on investment. Why can't you see that people will just take advantage?" Ruby felt her shoulders tense. She'd witnessed rude behavior from well-off customers, but it was rare to see such open dismissal of charitable work. She began passing out menus, trying to appear unaffected by the snide remarks. Once the Harringtons had quieted, Ruby took their orders. They spoke of seared scallops, truffle pasta, and filet mignon, but in between, she couldn't help catching snippets of a deeper tension. Jackson's attempts to mention social programs or educational funds were immediately met with sarcasm from his mother, Teresa, and disinterest from his father, Douglas. The only one who seemed partially supportive was an older man with kind eyes, introduced as Henry, Jackson's uncle. He nodded at Jackson's talk of charitable causes, but didn't engage enough to shield him from the other's criticism. Ruby stepped aside to relay the orders to the kitchen, her mind buzzing. She'd never seen a family so brazenly at odds in a public place. The Harrington name alone carried weight, but it seemed Jackson's philanthropic ideas were a point of contention. She felt a pang of sympathy for him. It couldn't be easy being the black sheep in a family so focused on profit. As she returned to the dining area, Ruby noticed how Jackson glanced her way, perhaps sensing her empathy. She gave a polite nod, fighting the urge to say something reassuring. Instead, she hovered near the table's periphery, filling water glasses while listening to the constant undercurrent of tension. An inexplicable feeling tugged at Ruby. Jackson's face, his quiet composure, something about him nagged at her memory. She chalked it up to nerves and concentrated on her job, yet that sensation lingered, growing stronger with every passing minute. Something was about to break the routine she'd clung to for so long, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it or not. Ruby retreated briefly to the service station by the kitchen, giving herself a moment to steady her hands. She had refilled the Harrington family's champagne glasses twice now, and with every return trip to the table, the tension among them seemed to escalate. Teresa Harrington's dismissive remarks about Jackson's charitable interests gnawed at Ruby's nerves. The blatant contempt felt jarring, especially in front of the entire restaurant staff. Leaning against the counter, she tried to dispel the growing sense of unease. Why couldn't she shake the impression that she recognized Jackson from somewhere? The shape of his jaw, the subdued sincerity in his eyes. It reminded her of a moment from her past she couldn't quite pin down. Her mind drifted back to the memory of Ashley struggling in that lake a decade ago. She recalled the silhouette of a man diving in without hesitation, dragging her sister to safety. It had happened so fast that Ruby had barely gotten a glimpse of the rescuer's face. Still, something in her gut insisted it could have been Jackson Harrington. She glanced up to see Linda peering around the corner, concern written on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Linda said softly, her tone gentle. "Are you all right, hon?" Ruby let out a shaky breath. "I'm fine, just that family out there, the Harringtons. There's something else." Linda nodded knowingly. High society drama often spills over wherever they go. Don't let it shake you. Remember your job. Be polite, be efficient, and don't get involved. Unless, she added with a wry smile, you're planning to become a millionaire yourself. Ruby offered a half-hearted laugh. She appreciated Linda's attempt at humor, but her mind kept circling back to the puzzle of Jackson. Could he be the same person who saved Ashley? She scolded herself for even entertaining the thought. The world was enormous, and it seemed unlikely. Yet the feeling wouldn't leave her. Deciding she couldn't dwell on it while tables waited, she forced her shoulders back and returned to the dining room. She found Jackson sitting quietly, while Teresa and Douglas swapped gossip about other business tycoons. Henry, the uncle, sipped his wine as though bored by the conversation. Charlotte, Jackson's sister, rolled her eyes whenever Jackson opened his mouth. The entire dynamic made Ruby uneasy. When she arrived with fresh bread, Jackson looked up, meeting her gaze. "Thank you," he said quietly, his tone genuine in a way that contrasted sharply with his mother's. She nodded. "Certainly, sir." As she moved around the table distributing bread, Teresa glanced pointedly in Jackson's direction. "Why must you insist on this philanthropic nonsense?" she asked, exasperated. "You know how many times we've tried to support your ideas, only to see negligible returns." Jackson sighed. "People need a chance, Mother. Not everyone starts life on the same footing." Charlotte snickered. "Spare us the sermon, Jackson. It's tedious." Ruby pretended to focus on adjusting silverware, but inside she felt anger brewing. She knew exactly how hard life could be for those who lacked advantages. Her own mother's medical bills were a constant reminder that not everyone had a safety net. That the Harringtons could be so dismissive bothered her more than she cared to admit. Serving the main courses, Ruby took note of how Jackson ate slowly, barely engaging in the conversation. Douglas launched into a monologue about the new acquisition, praising the family's business acumen. "This acquisition cements our name in yet another sector," he boasted. "Investors are thrilled. No more talk of side projects. We need to focus on what's profitable." Ruby's anger flared. She wished she could say something to defend Jackson's intentions, but years of scrimping and saving had taught her to pick her battles carefully, especially when job security was at stake. Midway through the meal, Jackson excused himself, presumably to get a moment of peace. Ruby noticed him passing by the bar, his eyes lingering on the restaurant's decor, as if searching for something to anchor him. She deliberated for a moment, then walked over, heart pounding. She found him standing near a large window overlooking the city lights. He wore a thoughtful expression that hinted at sadness beneath the surface. Ruby had no idea why she felt compelled to speak to him. It was far beyond her usual role as a server. Still, something in her urged her forward. "Pardon me," she began softly. "I hope everything is to your satisfaction. If there's anything else you need." Jackson turned, regarding her with the same serious gaze. "Everything's fine. Thank you for asking." He hesitated, as though wrestling with words. "You don't seem intimidated by my family." Ruby blinked. "I'm used to all kinds of customers," she replied carefully. "I try not to let it get to me." He studied her a moment longer, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, then nodded. "Good policy," he said, offering a faint, polite smile. The moment felt oddly personal for a server-customer exchange. Ruby's mind spun with half-formed questions about him, about her sister's near death, about whether the boy who'd saved Ashley could now be standing right here. But she said nothing more, only offered a slight bow of her head and turned back to her duties. Behind her, Jackson let out a low sigh that she heard, faint as a whisper, but it stayed with her like an echo of unspoken burdens. Back at her station, Ruby felt her pulse quicken. She glanced at the clock. There were still a few hours left until closing. The restaurant was nearly full, with the hum of conversations and the clatter of dishes forming a constant backdrop. She wished she could escape into that noise, but the tension within the Harrington table commanded her attention whenever she got close. She noticed Martin lurking near the maitre d's stand, his sharp eyes scanning the room. When she caught his gaze, he tipped his chin, a silent signal to stay alert. Ruby quickly smoothed her apron and approached the Harringtons once more, checking on drinks and clearing away empty plates. The family was locked in a discussion about finalizing documents for the acquisition, using terms Ruby didn't fully understand. She gleaned only that it was a monumental deal that would expand the Harrington empire. In between sips of wine, Teresa shot disparaging remarks at Jackson about his philanthropic obsession. Charlotte occasionally chimed in, reiterating how the family name needed prestige, not charity. Ruby felt her stomach churn, recalling her mother's struggles and how a simple act of kindness might have saved her family's finances from crumbling. She tried to keep her face neutral. When she returned to the kitchen to pick up dessert orders, cannoli and tiramisu for the table, she overheard Linda briefing two other servers about the VIP group. "Keep them happy. No mistakes," Linda warned in a hushed tone. Seeing Ruby, Linda gestured her over. "You're doing fine, but be careful. Martin is on edge. The last thing he wants is any friction." Ruby forced a faint smile. "I'll keep it together." She grabbed the dessert tray, her hands shaking slightly, and made her way back to deliver the sweets. The moment she set the dishes down, Teresa turned to her. "Miss," Teresa said coolly, "your name is Ruby, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Ruby replied, cautious. "Please call the manager. We need to discuss tomorrow evening's arrangements for our celebration. This might become a multi-day affair." Ruby nodded, stepping away to find Martin. She spotted Jackson casting a weary glance her way, as though silently apologizing for his family's demands. She offered him a reassuring nod, hoping it conveyed that she'd seen worse. As she crossed the dining room, she felt the weight of the Harrington name bearing down on her. Even regular patrons seemed curious about the table, whispering behind champagne flutes. When Martin arrived at the table, Teresa launched into a long list of requests. A private section of the restaurant roped off for the following night, a top-shelf champagne brand imported from France, special floral arrangements. Ruby stood a short distance away, scribbling quick notes on a small pad. Martin politely assured Teresa the restaurant would meet every request, no matter how extravagant. Douglas, the patriarch, spoke in a commanding tone. "Money is no object for our celebration. Just make sure everything is perfect." "Yes, Mr. Harrington," Martin replied with a tight smile. Jackson, who had remained silent during this negotiation, finally set his fork down. "We're still finalizing the details, so perhaps we should hold off on making grand plans, Father." His voice was calm, but the tension in his shoulders was evident. Charlotte huffed. "Oh, please, Jackson. You don't have to rain on the parade just because you feel conflicted." Ruby caught the flicker of pain in Jackson's eyes. She knew that feeling all too well, being in conflict with family but lacking the power to openly fight back. She felt an unspoken connection to him, though she couldn't fully articulate why. By the time Martin finished taking instructions, Teresa declared they were done for the night. Ruby prepared to settle their bill, noting how Charlotte offered a dismissive wave of her manicured hand to hush her. "Charge it to the Harrington account," Charlotte said, rising from her seat. "We'll sign whatever is needed at the front." The entire family moved to leave, but Jackson lagged behind, appearing as though he wanted to say more. He hesitated, then followed them. Ruby stood there with the check folder in hand, feeling the undercurrent of something unfinished. She wondered if Jackson ever truly got a chance to voice his thoughts. Glancing around, she saw other diners relaxing into their meals. Oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded, she headed back to the service station, dropping off the bill to be processed. Her heart still thumped with residual nerves. Martin approached, brow furrowed. "Did you note all their requests?" he asked, voice clipped. "Tomorrow is going to be another big night. Don't mess this up, Ruby." She swallowed hard, nodding. Yes, Mr. Rodriguez, I have it all written down. He held her gaze for a moment, as though searching for any sign of incompetence or rebellion, then relented with a brief nod. Good. Now, see to your other tables. Ruby watched the Harringtons exit through the glass doors. Just before stepping outside, Jackson threw one last glance over his shoulder, catching Ruby's eye. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of tension, shared unease, and the sense that this was far from over. As midnight approached, Bellini's had nearly emptied. The few remaining customers lingered over after-dinner drinks or coffee, talking in hushed tones. Ruby's feet ached, and her temples throbbed with the onset of a headache. She still had one last set of cutlery to polish and a couple of tables to wipe down before she could clock out. She found Linda in the back kitchen, placing stainless steel pans on drying racks. The kitchen lights were harsh, but the warmth in Linda's voice offered some comfort. "Tough crowd tonight, huh?" Linda said, handing Ruby a clean towel. Ruby rubbed the towel between her fingers, recalling the Harringtons' visit. "It was something else," she admitted quietly. "I've seen demanding customers before, but this family takes it to a whole new level." Linda raised an eyebrow, "especially that mother, Teresa. She didn't even look at most of us. Her money does the talking, I suppose." Ruby sighed. "And Jackson, I don't know, he seemed so unhappy. They all talked down to him, making him sound foolish for wanting to do charitable work." Linda wiped her hands on her apron and leaned in closer. "I've been around long enough to see that some families have more power struggles than entire corporations. Wealth just adds another layer of complication. But trust me, those big towers of pride eventually crumble, one way or another." Ruby considered this for a moment, thinking of her own family. She had grown up with far less money and far different challenges, but there had been plenty of tension at home, especially after her father left. Perhaps every family had its own brand of turmoil. She glanced at the restaurant clock. It was nearly 12:30 a.m. "I should finish up," she said, picking up a stack of plates. "Thanks for the talk." She wandered back out to the dining area. Shadows from the ornate light fixtures fell across the tables, and the hum of the air conditioning created a steady lull. She methodically wiped surfaces and set chairs in place, letting her mind replay the day's events. Her gut still twisted with the possibility that Jackson was the young man who had saved Ashley years ago. She tried to recall every detail of that day at the lake, but all she had was the memory of frantic splashing and the silhouette of a determined figure. As she finished her final task, Martin emerged from the office, jacket in hand. He surveyed the room, nodding approvingly at the clean tables. "Good work tonight," he remarked. Then, as though catching himself, he added in a more measured tone, "Tomorrow's going to be even busier. I'll be expecting your best efforts." Ruby gave a polite smile. "Of course, Mr. Rodriguez." He left without further comment, and Ruby felt a wave of relief wash over her. She headed to the staff locker area, where she exchanged her apron for a battered coat that had seen better days. She checked her phone. There was a text from Ashley asking how her night had gone. Ruby typed a brief reply, promising to fill her in the next day. She didn't want to worry Ashley with talk of rich families or the faint hope she harbored about reuniting with her rescuer. On her way out, she paused by a display of framed photographs near the entrance, black and white pictures of past diners, local celebrities who had visited Bellini's. She let her eyes drift over the faces, half expecting to see Jackson's photo somewhere. That was silly, she told herself. Besides, if he truly were Ashley's savior, how would she even approach the subject without risking her job? The notion felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Stepping into the cool Chicago night, she zipped her coat and started the short walk to the bus stop. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and an occasional car whooshed by. She spotted her reflection in a darkened store window. Tired eyes, hair flattened by a day's worth of stress, posture bent forward as though bracing for a storm. But in that reflection, she also caught a glimmer of resolve. Over the years, she had developed a quiet determination, fueled by a need to protect her family. If Jackson Harrington truly was the one who saved Ashley, she owed him a heartfelt thanks. A simple expression of gratitude might not change the world, but it mattered. Could she risk losing her job for it? She wasn't sure, yet the thought of letting him walk away without ever knowing how he'd changed their lives felt equally unbearable. She turned onto the main road just as the bus pulled up. Climbing aboard, she sank into a seat near the back, letting the dim interior lights relax her tired eyes. When she closed them, she pictured the Harrington family's table, the swirl of disdainful remarks, and the look on Jackson's face when he'd glimpsed her sympathy. She realized something important. For the first time in a very long time, she felt a pull toward an action she couldn't fully rationalize. It was more than curiosity. It was a calling to do something right, whatever that might be. As the bus chugged through Chicago's midnight streets, Ruby promised herself she wouldn't dismiss that instinct too quickly. Exhausted from the previous night, Ruby arrived early at Bellini's the next day, hoping to collect her thoughts before the evening rush. She found the kitchen lights already on and the hum of an overhead vent droning softly. Linda was there by the sink, sleeves rolled up, chopping fresh herbs. The comforting aroma of basil and parsley mingled with the sharper scent of garlic, a small refuge from Ruby's worries. Ruby set down her bag and pulled on her apron. Linda, noticing the tension in Ruby's posture, beckoned her closer. "You're starting early," Linda said, her kindly eyes full of concern. "Couldn't sleep." Ruby shook her head, picking up a dish rag and fiddling with its edge. "Not a wink," she admitted. "I keep running last night's conversations through my mind, Jackson's family, the way they talked to him. And there's something else too. I have this suspicion that Jackson might be the man who saved my sister years ago. It sounds crazy, I know, but I can't shake the feeling." Linda paused, her chopping. "It doesn't sound crazy. Stranger things have happened in this world. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Ruby let out a long breath. "I want to thank him, but I'm terrified. If I'm wrong, I'll sound ridiculous. And if I'm right, he might think I'm intruding on his life. Plus, I can't afford to lose this job by overstepping." Setting the knife aside, Linda wiped her hands on a towel. She leaned on the counter, face thoughtful. "Hon, sometimes you have to speak your truth, even if it makes waves. I can't tell you what to do, but I know how regret can eat away at you. If you feel that strongly, maybe it's worth the risk." Ruby appreciated the warmth in Linda's tone. It felt like the advice of a trusted aunt, the kind of guidance she'd lacked since her family had been so overwhelmed by her mother's health issues and constant financial strain. She offered a small smile. "Thanks. I needed to hear that." They continued chatting while prepping for the night's service. Linda recounted a story from her youth. She'd wanted to apply to a culinary institute in New York, but had been discouraged by her parents, who expected her to find a more conventional job. "I never applied," Linda said wistfully, "and I still wonder how different life might have been." Ruby grabbed a cutting board and started slicing bread for the evening's table baskets. "That's tough," she murmured. "I guess you don't want me to repeat the same kind of regret." Linda shook her head gently. "Exactly. Maybe your situation is different, but the point stands. Sometimes you have to risk a little. Don't let fear make decisions for you." With that, the kitchen door swung open, and Martin strode in, scanning his clipboard. He frowned when he saw the two talking, but Ruby hurried to look busy, and Linda resumed her chopping with practiced efficiency. Martin looked at Ruby. We're expecting the Harrington party again tonight. They've requested the private dining room. I want you to be their primary server, so be prepared." Ruby's heart fluttered. This was her chance to speak to Jackson, but also a huge risk. "Yes, Mr. Rodriguez," she said. "I'll make sure everything is perfect." Once Martin left, Linda gave Ruby a knowing glance. "You'll be fine," she said softly. "And remember what we talked about." Time passed quickly, and soon the tables were set. Fresh tablecloths, polished silverware, and carefully arranged centerpieces in the private room were all ready. Ruby checked the place settings one last time before heading to the small staff break area for a sip of water. Her reflection in a mirrored panel caught her eye. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and beneath the fatigue lurked a flicker of determination. She thought about the Harringtons, Teresa's icy demeanor, Charlotte's caustic remarks, Douglas's prideful distance, and the stoic uncle, Henry, who seemed at least somewhat sympathetic. Most of all, she thought of Jackson, his quiet frustration, the sadness in his eyes. If he truly was Ashley's rescuer, how could she remain silent? Before she could dwell too long, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Ashley popped up. "Hey sis, everything okay?" "You haven't responded. Call me when you can." Ruby felt a pang of guilt. She typed back a quick apology, promising to explain everything soon. Ashley didn't know about Ruby's growing certainty that their savior had stepped back into their lives. Part of Ruby wanted to confirm the truth first, if there was any truth to confirm. She tucked her phone away and exhaled. The mentor figure she'd found in Linda bolstered her courage. Even if she didn't have a plan, at least she felt a sense of purpose. Outside, she could hear the faint stirrings of guests arriving. This was it. Time to walk the path, no matter where it led. Ruby straightened her apron, glanced at the immaculate dinner setting, and told herself that this time she would not remain silent. That evening, as dusk settled over Chicago, Ruby stood near the entrance to Bellini's private dining room. The Harringtons were expected any minute, and her nerves buzzed like an electrical current. She fiddled with the edge of a linen napkin, replaying Linda's words in her mind. "Sometimes you have to speak your truth, even if it makes waves." One by one, the Harrington family arrived. Teresa swept in first, wearing a silky navy blue dress and an expression that signaled she was displeased by even the smallest imperfection. Charlotte followed, looking equally polished in a designer outfit, scrolling through her phone. Then came Henry, who nodded politely at Ruby but looked distracted. Douglas entered with measured steps, chin held high as though appraising the space to see if it matched his lofty standards. Finally, Jackson appeared in the doorway, wearing a tailored suit that might have come straight from a glossy magazine. He greeted the hostess with a subdued smile, then cast a quick glance around. Ruby saw the slight tension in his posture. He didn't stride in with the same self-assurance as the others. Instead, it seemed as if he were preparing himself for a battle he knew was coming. Once the family settled in, Ruby approached the table with a carafe of water. She did her best to keep her voice steady as she greeted them. "Good evening, Harrington family. My name is Ruby, and I'll be your server tonight. May I start you off with some drinks?" Teresa barely looked up. "Yes, the same champagne as last time, and be quick about it." Ruby forced a polite smile. "Of course, ma'am." She glanced toward Jackson, who offered her a small nod in acknowledgement, though he said nothing. As she took drink orders, she couldn't help overhearing Teresa's pointed remarks about the acquisition. "We're finalizing the contracts tomorrow," Teresa said, her gaze fixed on Jackson. "No more delays, no more detours." Charlotte flipped her hair back with a scoff. "And definitely no more nonsense about philanthropic clauses. Right, Jackson?" Ruby's knuckles tightened around her order pad. The tone in Charlotte's voice was as dismissive as ever. She felt a spark of irritation on Jackson's behalf, but remembered Linda's caution to remain professional. "Still, How far could she go without jeopardizing everything? She returned with the champagne, carefully pouring it into fine crystal flutes. The family hardly paused their conversation as Ruby moved around the table, filling each glass. Jackson was the last one she served. She noticed how he stared down at the tablecloth, as if lost in thought. When their eyes met, there was a fleeting flash of recognition. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Teresa's impatient sigh cut him off. "Let's toast to the merger," Teresa declared, raising her glass. "Here's hoping the Harrington name grows even more prestigious." As they sipped, Jackson drank slowly, clearly unenthused by the celebration. Ruby withdrew a few steps, waiting for any sign they might need her. A sense of foreboding washed over her. The entire dynamic felt fraught, like a drawn bowstring. She scanned the room for Martin, but he was busy near the main dining area, likely making sure no detail was missed for the other guests. Ruby took a moment to steel herself. So much inside her wanted to find a private moment to speak with Jackson, if only to confirm her suspicions. But the fear was there too, fear of losing her job, fear of being dismissed or laughed at if she was wrong. For the 1000th time, she wondered if her instinct was simply wishful thinking. The family proceeded to talk about share prices, deal deadlines, and upcoming travel arrangements. Douglas boasted of golf courses where he intended to celebrate once the merger was announced publicly. Charlotte bragged about a new investment property in the city's most expensive district. All the while, Jackson's silence grew heavier, as though the rest of them were speaking a language he no longer wanted to understand. Ruby noticed that Henry, who generally came across as mild-mannered, seemed uncomfortable. He kept clearing his throat whenever Teresa's comments grew too sharp. At one point, he murmured, "Maybe we should hear what Jackson has to say." But Teresa brushed him off with a curt wave. As they finished their appetizers, Ruby collected the empty plates and noticed Jackson tapping a finger against the table, an almost imperceptible sign of agitation. That was all it took for Ruby to decide she would try to talk to him. Linda's advice echoed in her mind, urging her to speak her truth. She might never get another chance, and if she remained silent, she'd never forgive herself. Heading toward the kitchen to fetch the main courses, Ruby paused in the hallway, pressing a hand to her stomach as a swirl of nerves hit. "Take the risk," she told herself. "Just find a moment away from the others." She inhaled deeply, tasting a mixture of anticipation and dread. Soon she would have to choose, keep her head down, or take a step beyond her comfort zone. Carrying a tray of entrees, Ruby re-entered the private dining room. The tension in the air felt thicker than ever. She placed a filet mignon before Douglas, a lobster risotto in front of Charlotte, and a grilled salmon dish for Teresa. At Jackson's request, she set down a plate of roasted vegetables and chicken, though he hardly acknowledged the food. As the family resumed their conversation, Teresa's voice sharpened. "Jackson, are you listening? We need you to sign the paperwork tomorrow, so these philanthropic distractions won't slow us down." Jackson looked at her with tired eyes. "I want to include a clause specifying funds for educational grants," he said quietly. "We've built an empire. It's time we give back." Charlotte rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You're welcome to do your charity work, but why must the entire family go along with it?" Douglas cut a piece of steak with a decisive motion. "We've indulged your charity plans long enough. We're done talking about this." That feeling Ruby had, the sensation that something was about to snap, rose to the surface. She moved to refill drinks, trying to maintain professionalism, but every word of the Harringtons' conversation grated on her. They seemed so dismissive of anything benevolent. She recalled the countless nights she'd worked 2 jobs, struggling to keep her sister in college. If not for a small scholarship Ashley had won, their family's financial burden would have been unbearable. As she filled Jackson's water glass, she noticed him close his eyes for a moment, as if steeling himself against the barrage. His family's scorn made her chest tighten with anger and empathy. She recognized the heartbreak of being the only one to see value in helping others. In the silence that followed, Teresa made a derisive comment about charities being for people who can't help themselves. Ruby felt her cheeks grow hot. She knew she was on the edge of crossing a professional boundary, but her emotions surged. She moved around the table, clearing empty dishes, hyper-aware that something huge was building inside her. Then it happened. Jackson tried one more time to speak, to assert himself. "Mother, father, there's more to life than acquisitions. If we're not contributing—" Teresa interrupted him with a wave of her hand. "Spare me. You'll sign those papers tomorrow, or we'll let Charlotte handle the negotiations. You'll be sidelined from the company's decisions." Ruby felt a throb in her chest. All the harsh words, the disdain, the belittling. She couldn't bear it any longer. She set down her tray and, before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped toward Jackson. A rush of adrenaline flooded her as she reached for his shoulder. Her rational mind screamed that she was making a catastrophic mistake, but her heart pushed her forward. In a swift, startling motion, Ruby leaned in and kissed Jackson on the lips, brief but full of the pent-up gratitude and anger swirling inside her. She heard Charlotte gasp, Teresa shriek, and Douglas mumble a furious oath. Breaking the kiss, she pressed her palm against Jackson's cheek. His wide eyes mirrored her own shock. In the stunned silence, she whispered, "You saved my sister's life 10 years ago. We never got to thank you." For an agonizing second, Jackson just stared, his expression a kaleidoscope of confusion and sudden recognition. Ruby's pulse hammered. What did I just do? The Harringtons erupted into a furious clamor. Teresa demanded to know what was going on. Charlotte gestured wildly for the manager, and Douglas shot up from his chair, face flushed with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared. But Jackson didn't move away from Ruby. His posture softened, and the corner of his mouth twitched as memory dawned on him. "Oh my God," he murmured, voice shaking slightly. "You were there, by the lake." For a moment, it felt like the rest of the world receded. Then Teresa's voice tore through the hush. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed at Ruby. "How dare you lay a hand on my son?" Ruby's mind spun with the gravity of her action. She knew she was risking everything, her job, her reputation, possibly her safety, if this powerful family retaliated, yet she couldn't regret it. She'd held back her gratitude for a decade. A rush of staff members, led by a frantic Martin, charged into the room, drawn by the commotion. Martin's face turned pale. "Ruby, what have you done?" he whispered, eyes darting from her to Jackson. Jackson slowly stood, placing himself between Ruby and his family's outrage. His voice grew calm but resolute. "She's someone who remembers what it means to help others. Something this family has forgotten." The air crackled with disbelief and fury. Ruby stood there, her cheeks burning, adrenaline buzzing through her veins. She knew that with a single impulsive act, she'd stepped into a world of consequences she couldn't have imagined. And deep down, she felt something else, a sense of relief that, at last, she'd spoken her truth. The private dining room exploded with noise. Teresa yelled for security, Charlotte demanded that Martin fire Ruby immediately, and Douglas threatened to call the restaurant owner. Over the hubbub, Henry tried to interject, but even his raised voice was lost in the furor. Ruby's heart thundered in her chest as she braced herself for the backlash. She forced herself not to retreat, though her legs trembled. One glance at Jackson told her he was still reeling from the kiss. His eyes flickered from his astonished family to Ruby, then back again. Martin rushed toward Ruby, catching her by the arm. He hissed under his breath, "What on earth were you thinking? Are you trying to get yourself fired?" He looked ready to throw her out right then and there, but with the Harringtons present, he seemed torn about how to proceed. Teresa jabbed a manicured finger in Martin's direction. "I demand you remove this woman right now." She's crossed every professional boundary." Ruby swallowed hard. She wasn't sure if Jackson would speak up, but suddenly he did. "Stop," Jackson said firmly, his voice carrying above the din. "Let's all calm down." The forceful tone in Jackson's voice startled everyone into silence for a moment. Teresa's mouth hung open, as if she couldn't believe her son would contradict her publicly. Douglas's face darkened, and Charlotte glared daggers at Ruby. Ruby felt the sting of tears threatening to blur her vision. She'd never wanted to create a scene, only to express her gratitude. "But now, look what I've done." Jackson cleared his throat, took a step toward Ruby, and turned to face his family. "Let me remind you," he began, scanning their furious expressions, "that I'm a grown man who can decide who he talks to or kisses." Charlotte spluttered in disbelief. Teresa tried to interrupt, but Jackson raised a hand. "I recognize Ruby," he went on, sounding more confident with each word. "A long time ago, I rescued a girl at Lake Somerton. I never knew her name, or that she had a family searching for me. Ruby's sister was that girl." Silence enveloped the room, punctuated only by the muffled chatter from the main dining area. Martin looked completely out of his depth, glancing between the Harringtons and his server. Henry, who had been hovering near the doorway, stepped closer. His eyes moved from Ruby to Jackson, a hint of understanding dawning on his face. Teresa, however, seemed unimpressed. "So what if you saved someone once upon a time?" she snapped. "Does that justify this spectacle?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "Yes, it does," he replied calmly. "If I hadn't pulled Ashley out of that lake, she would have drowned. And if Ruby wants to thank me, well, maybe I should be grateful someone actually appreciates what I do." Ruby felt a wave of relief mixed with anxiety. Jackson's defense of her was a balm, but she was all too aware that Teresa and Douglas held immense power, not just socially, but also economically. Martin looked like he was about to faint. "Look," Martin interjected, voice shaking. "Let's settle this quietly. We can all move to a back office." "I have no interest in a private chat," Teresa hissed. "I want this woman fired on the spot." "Jackson, if you have any sense of loyalty to this family, you'll let Martin handle it. We can't allow a public humiliation like this." Jackson took a breath, and Ruby saw the conflict in his face. She realized that while he wanted to stand up for her, years of deference to his parents weighed on him. For a heartbeat, she feared he'd side with them. But then he shook his head. "No, Mother, I won't let you ruin her." Ruby acted from gratitude, a gratitude none of you seem to understand. His voice hardened. "And if I'm staying here tonight, she stays too." A tremor of outrage coursed through Teresa's features. She glanced at Douglas, expecting him to back her up. And he did. "Jackson," Douglas warned, "you're playing with fire. This girl is not worth jeopardizing our entire arrangement." The ominous threat hung in the air, and Ruby felt her stomach lurch. She had no illusions about how easily the Harringtons could push her out of a job, or worse, but Jackson stood firm. Henry placed a tentative hand on Teresa's shoulder. "Let's not make a rash scene. Perhaps we should speak privately, Teresa." He looked over at Charlotte and Douglas, trying to usher them away from the standoff. As they reluctantly moved into the hallway, Martin followed, wringing his hands. The door closed, leaving Jackson and Ruby alone in the private room. For a moment, neither spoke. Ruby's cheeks burned with embarrassment and the remnants of adrenaline. "You took a big risk," Jackson said quietly, turning to her. "I still can't believe you did that." Ruby lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry for causing trouble. I never got to thank you. Ashley is everything to me. And without you—" He silenced her with a gentle nod. "I understand. And for what it's worth, I'm grateful, more than you know." Her heart pounded at his words. Yet the tension outside that door weighed heavily on her, reminding her this was only the beginning of a much larger confrontation. They both knew that once the Harringtons made a decision, their wrath would be swift and severe. Soon after the heated scene, the door to the private dining room opened again. In walked Henry Harrington, looking uneasy but determined. He gave Jackson a measured look, then turned to Ruby. "I asked Martin to step away for a few minutes," he said. "The family is still out in the hallway, furious. But I figured maybe we could discuss things more calmly if we weren't all shouting at once." Ruby dipped her head in acknowledgement, unsure of what to expect. Jackson motioned for Henry to join them at the table. Henry sat, taking a moment to straighten his tie. Ruby tentatively took a seat as well, though she felt awkward, like a child summoned to the principal's office. Henry glanced at Jackson. "My nephew, I don't agree with how your parents spoke to you tonight, nor do I endorse their dismissal of your charitable interests. Truthfully, I've long admired your desire to use our resources for something good." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "But you know how they are, set in their ways, unwavering in their conviction that profit is everything." Jackson nodded. "They've made that clear, but what happened just now? Ruby only did what she felt was right." Henry's gaze shifted to Ruby, and she braced herself. "Martin told me a little about you," Henry said gently. "You work 2 jobs, supporting your sister through college and caring for a sick mother. That's admirable, especially in this day and age." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I imagine you didn't kiss Jackson just for attention." Ruby let out a trembling breath. "Absolutely not. I recognized him as the man who saved my sister from drowning 10 years ago. We never got to thank him properly. My emotions got the better of me." Henry tilted his head. "I believe you." The simple statement carried a warmth that Ruby found reassuring. Then he ran a hand across his brow, frowning slightly. "My sister-in-law, Teresa, will demand retribution for this insult to our family. I'd like to prevent that if I can, for Jackson's sake, and, if you'll allow me, for yours." Ruby hesitated. "How could you prevent it? She's threatening to have me fired, possibly worse." Henry straightened, his voice calm but firm. "I'm also a Harrington, and I hold significant shares in the family business. I don't often throw my weight around, but in this case I can help protect you from immediate fallout, provided we handle this wisely." He turned to Jackson. "You'll need to stand your ground, nephew. Defend Ruby openly. Once Teresa sees we're unified, she may back down to avoid public scandal. Our family hates negative press above all else." Jackson looked thoughtful. "I'm not afraid to stand up for Ruby, or for what I believe in. But they're about to sign major contracts, and if we cause a rift now—" "Then so be it," Henry interjected. "I'd rather see that happen than watch you become bitter under their thumb." Ruby's head was spinning at the idea of a Harrington ally. She'd braced herself for hostility, but Henry's composed demeanor offered a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," she said softly, surprised by her own sincerity. "I never meant for this to turn into such a battle." Henry offered a sympathetic smile. "I know. But sometimes life throws us battles we don't anticipate." Glancing at his watch, he rose from the table. "I should go speak to them before they decide to storm back in. You two stay here." He left the room, shutting the door behind him gently. The muffled sounds of a heated argument filtered through the walls, but at least no one was screaming in their immediate vicinity. Jackson leaned back in his chair and looked at Ruby. "You okay?" She nodded, nerves still humming beneath her skin. "I'll manage. I'm worried about my job, though." Martin already seemed furious. "We'll handle Martin," Jackson said with quiet resolve. "And if my family threatens to shut you out of this restaurant, I'll ensure you don't suffer. You have my word." His tone held a conviction that made Ruby's pulse race. She'd worked so hard to stay afloat, never depending on anyone else. Yet, a part of her felt immense relief that Jackson might stand behind her. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly, fighting tears. "I just wanted to say thank you." "I know," Jackson murmured, resting a hand briefly on hers. "And I never truly realized how much it would mean to hear those words, especially from someone whose life was touched by my actions. My family acts like what I do is worthless, but it's not." He paused, expression growing more determined. "Ruby, your gratitude reminded me that even one life changed is enough of a reason to keep going." She smiled through a sheen of tears, hoping Henry could diffuse the crisis outside. They exchanged a glance that felt weighted with unspoken understanding, forging an unlikely alliance born out of gratitude and rebellion. Through the door, the raised voices continued, but Ruby felt a new kind of calm settle around them, as if they'd found a quiet corner in a storm that refused to relent. Minutes later, the door burst open again, and in came Teresa with Charlotte in tow. Both wore expressions of steely anger. Henry appeared behind them, lips pressed into a grim line. Martin hovered anxiously at the threshold, clearly torn between pleasing the Harringtons and managing his own staff. Douglas was noticeably absent, perhaps cooling off or making phone calls to rally support. Teresa fixed her piercing gaze on Jackson first. "How dare you stand against us?" she spat. "This fiasco will damage our family's reputation. Do you realize that? People are going to talk. About you, about this girl, about all of us." Charlotte chimed in with a sneer. "I've already received 2 texts from acquaintances who saw the commotion through the glass doors." "Word travels fast, Jackson." Jackson met their fury with a remarkable calm. "I'm aware of the risk, but you've spent years ignoring what truly matters to me. This might be the first time I've seen your real colors so clearly. Ruby did nothing wrong. She simply thanked me for saving her sister." Teresa's jaw tightened. She looked as though she wanted to hurl 1,000 accusations, but Henry cleared his throat pointedly. "We've come to an agreement," he said. "Teresa Guy, you and Douglas will continue finalizing the paperwork for tomorrow's signing. Jackson will remain involved, but he has every right to request philanthropic clauses be reintroduced. In exchange, we'll keep this incident away from public scandal." Ruby felt her stomach twist. In exchange, she braced for whatever ultimatum Teresa would demand. "What about her?" Charlotte said, nodding at Ruby with disdain. "Are we supposed to just pretend this never happened?" Henry's gaze flicked to Ruby, then back to Teresa and Charlotte. "We'll keep it out of the press. Yes, but that doesn't mean Ruby should lose her livelihood. Firing her would only stir more drama. Besides, Jackson wants her treated fairly." His tone was measured, but the subtext was clear. If Teresa pushed further, Henry would push back. Teresa curled her lip. "And what if I don't care about the drama, Henry? What if I simply want her gone?" Martin, who had been silent, decided it was time to speak up. "Bellinis can't afford negative publicity either," he said, voice trembling slightly. "If Miss Phillips is fired without cause, that alone could stir up questions. And Henry is right. This story getting out to certain media outlets would only fan the flames." Charlotte opened her mouth to argue, but Teresa silenced her with a raised hand. She turned to Jackson. "You're making a grave mistake. This girl doesn't belong in our world. She's beneath you. Can't you see this is all an opportunistic ploy? She recognized you from some old memory and saw a chance to climb." Ruby's cheeks burned. She couldn't stay silent this time. "I'm not trying to climb anywhere," she said quietly, though her voice held a trembling edge. "I'm just grateful Ashley is alive." "If that's offensive to you, I don't know what to tell you." Teresa's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. Instead, she looked to Henry. "We leave the matter here then. But if I hear so much as a whisper that this fiasco is spreading, I'll make sure none of you—" She shot Jackson an icy glare. "Come out unscathed." With that, Teresa spun on her heel and walked out, Charlotte trailing behind. Martin let out a breath of profound relief, then mumbled something about needing to check on the main dining area and scurried after them. Henry lingered, shoulders sagging as though he'd just run a marathon. Jackson ran a hand over his face. "Thank you for intervening," he told Henry. "I know you didn't have to do that." Henry offered a weary smile. "I'm no saint, Jackson, but I won't stand by and watch the family devour one of its own." He glanced at Ruby. "I'm sorry for the way they treated you. Hopefully, this is the end of it, at least for now." Ruby exhaled slowly, feeling a massive weight lift from her chest. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Harrington. I truly do." Henry nodded. "Let's hope cooler heads prevail tomorrow." Then he turned to leave, adding softly before he shut the door, "Both of you, take care." Once Henry was gone, Jackson sank into a chair, elbows on his knees. Ruby could see the exhaustion etched into his features. They stayed like that in silence for a moment, absorbing the whirlwind that had just passed. At last, Ruby cleared her throat. "That was intense." "You can say that again," Jackson replied, a mirthless chuckle escaping his lips. "But thank you for standing up to them and for explaining yourself. I know it wasn't easy." "I didn't want them twisting the truth," Ruby said, voice trembling slightly. "They act like any genuine emotion must have an ulterior motive." She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry you have to deal with that." Jackson glanced at the door where his family had vanished. "I've dealt with it my whole life, but this is the first time I've openly fought back." He rubbed his temples. "Tomorrow's contract signing might be even more contentious now, but I can't pretend everything's fine. Seeing you take a stand reminded me it's okay to be more than a passive bystander in my own life." Ruby found herself unexpectedly touched. "I'm just a waitress." "You're more than that," he interrupted. "You proved it tonight. You did something incredibly brave." She felt heat rise to her cheeks again. The idea that Jackson Harrington might see her as brave rather than foolish was both comforting and terrifying. There would be consequences, no doubt, and she hadn't even begun to process them all. But in that moment, she realized the first reckoning had passed. She had faced Teresa and Charlotte's fury and survived. A heavy silence settled in the room. Through the glass doors, Ruby saw Linda watching from afar, concern etched on her face. Ruby glanced at Jackson, remembering the fear she'd felt before that impulsive kiss. It had all changed so quickly, and they now stood on the brink of a whole new set of challenges, but at least they weren't alone. Ruby woke the next morning with a lingering knot in her stomach, remnants of the confrontation at Bellini's. It was her day off at the diner, but she felt anything but relaxed. Though Henry's intervention had offered a momentary reprieve, she worried about the consequences that still loomed. She checked her phone to find a message from Ashley, who'd seen a brief snippet of someone's social media post mentioning drama at Bellini's. Ruby hadn't told her sister everything yet, but she suspected Ashley had pieced together parts of the story. Stepping into her modest kitchen, Ruby brewed a pot of coffee and stared at the calendar pinned to the wall. Rent was due in a week, her mother's hospital bills were still unpaid, and Ashley's next tuition payment loomed. She couldn't afford to lose her job. The thought of Teresa Harrington's rage sent a chill through her, but she also recalled the determined light in Jackson's eyes when he defended her. That memory sparked a small, cautious hope. Her phone buzzed. This time it was from an unknown number. Tentatively she answered, "Ruby, it's Jackson." His voice was low, as if he were speaking from a place where he needed to keep quiet. "I hope it's okay that I called. Henry gave me your number." She clutched the phone tighter. "Hi, yes, of course. Is everything all right?" He hesitated. "I'm about to head into a meeting with my parents and their legal team. It's the official contract signing for the new acquisition." I just wanted to let you know. I won't forget what we discussed. If it gets heated, I'm prepared to walk away unless they include some philanthropic clauses." Ruby felt her pulse quicken. "Jackson, that's a big step. Are you sure you want to risk it?" A soft chuckle came across the line. "You risked your job, and frankly your dignity, just to say thank you. It made me realize I've played it safe for too long. But listen, if things go south, they might try to retaliate against you. Stay alert, okay?" She swallowed hard. "I will. You too." They ended the call with few words, but the impact lingered. Ruby stood in her tiny kitchen, a swirl of pride and fear coursing through her. She realized this was one of the few times in her life she felt supported by someone beyond her immediate family. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. She considered going to the hospital to check on her mother, but a text from Martin interrupted her plan. "Need you at Bellini's by 4 p.m. for an important discussion. Don't be late." Her heart pounded. Had Teresa demanded her dismissal? Or maybe Henry's influence had forced Martin to handle things more diplomatically. Either way, it felt like an audition for her own future. She arrived at Bellini's well before 4, stepping into the main dining room with cautious steps. The restaurant was mostly empty at that hour, just a few staff prepping for the evening. The gleaming floors and elegant settings looked unchanged, yet everything felt different after last night's upheaval. Martin emerged from the back office, flipping through paperwork. His expression was guarded, neither friendly nor openly hostile. He motioned for Ruby to follow him to a small side room usually reserved for staff meetings. The space was cramped, holding a round table, a few chairs, and a whiteboard with the day's specials scrawled in one corner. Ruby sat, hands clasped to steady her nerves. Martin took a seat across from her, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "I've spoken with the owner," he began, voice tight, "and with Henry Harrington. Given the incident, there was serious consideration about terminating your employment. But Mr. Harrington strongly advised us to keep you on, citing the potential fallout." Her heart thumped. "So I'm not fired?" He shook his head. "Not yet. The owner isn't thrilled about the publicity risk if we let you go so soon after a public scene. Henry Harrington has some connections we'd rather not antagonize. Effective immediately, however, you'll be placed on a kind of probationary status. Any further misconduct, and your dismissal will be swift." Ruby's cheeks flushed. Relief and frustration mingled. "I understand. I didn't intend to cause trouble. It just—" Martin held up a hand. "I don't need details. Just don't repeat it. Tonight, you'll work a regular shift, but not in the private room if the Harringtons return. Understood?" She nodded. "Understood." Martin stood, appearing slightly less tense. "That's all for now. Clock in at your usual time, keep your head down, and let's hope this quiets down." When he left, Ruby sagged in her chair. She wouldn't lose her job today, at least. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that a storm was still brewing. A storm that might upend not just her life, but Jackson's as well. She left the side room and walked through the empty restaurant, tables set and waiting for the evening crowds. As she passed by the spot where she'd kissed Jackson, she felt her heart contract. That single impulsive act had triggered changes she couldn't predict. She inhaled a steadying breath, reminding herself she had no choice now but to face whatever came next. Late afternoon shadows stretched across the floor at Bellini's as Ruby began her shift, trying to steel herself for potential confrontations. Though Martin had assigned her to a different section of the restaurant, away from the Harringtons' preferred table, she remained on high alert. She passed Linda near the kitchen, who squeezed her arm gently. "I heard about the probation," Linda said softly. "I'm sorry." Ruby managed a half smile. "It's okay. Better than being let go." Linda nodded. "If you ever need backup, you know where to find me." Ruby felt gratitude swell in her chest. At least she wasn't as alone as she sometimes feared. She headed to her assigned tables, checking that the place settings were immaculate. Several of the evening's patrons trickled in, businessmen in tailored suits, couples dressed for a romantic dinner, and a few regulars who always requested the corner booth. Ruby slipped into her usual polite routine, taking orders, recommending specials, and refilling water glasses. Despite her efforts to focus, she couldn't stop scanning the entrance, half expecting Teresa or Charlotte to storm in, ready to make good on their threats. Every time the door opened, her pulse spiked. She found herself relieved and disappointed in equal measure when the Harrington family didn't appear. Would Jackson show up alone, or was he stuck in that contract signing, still battling for his philanthropic ideals? Toward the middle of her shift, the kitchen doors swung open and Martin emerged. He walked straight to Ruby, brow furrowed. "We just received a request for a table for two. Name Harrington," he whispered urgently. "I don't know if it's Jackson or one of the others. Either way, you're not to serve them. Understood?" Her heart thudded painfully. Understood. She returned to her tables, trying to quell the flurry of emotions. Part of her longed to see Jackson, to learn how his meeting had gone. Another part worried it might be Teresa or Charlotte coming to cause further trouble. 10 minutes passed, and Ruby felt every second like a tiny eternity. Finally, a hostess led two people into the dining area, Henry Harrington and an older gentleman Ruby didn't recognize. They took seats by the window. Henry's gaze flicked around the room, lingering on Ruby for a moment. He offered a tight smile, then turned his attention to the man across from him. Ruby continued her tasks, carefully avoiding Henry's table. Martin had made it clear she shouldn't serve any Harrington, no matter how friendly they might be. From the corner of her eye, she watched Henry speak to the older man in hushed tones. Every so often, Henry's expression darkened, suggesting the conversation wasn't entirely pleasant. After a while, Linda brushed past Ruby, quietly noting, "They look serious over there. Might be about the merger." Ruby nodded, a pang of curiosity gnawing at her. Then Martin motioned for her from the bar area, and she approached, stepping behind the counter. "Henry Harrington asked if you could make a brief appearance at his table," Martin said, looking torn. "He specifically requested you by name." Ruby's stomach somersaulted. "But I thought," Martin rubbed the back of his neck. "He insists. I'm not about to refuse a Harrington, especially not Henry. Just be discreet." She swallowed and made her way across the dining room. The older man with Henry was in the middle of sipping a glass of whiskey when Ruby arrived. Henry gestured for her to take the empty seat opposite him, which felt awkward in the middle of a shift. She perched on the edge, trying to maintain composure. "Ruby," Henry said, leaning forward, "this is Mr. Delaney, an associate of ours. He's heavily involved in our upcoming acquisition. I wanted him to hear from you firsthand, briefly, about how you feel regarding Jackson's philanthropic aims." Ruby blinked, heart pounding. Well, sir, I'm not sure what I could add." Mr. Delaney, a silver-haired man with keen eyes, spoke softly. "Henry tells me Jackson is quite passionate about certain charitable endeavors, and you've apparently provided some encouragement." Heat rose to her cheeks. She wasn't sure how to explain everything without embarrassing herself or Jackson. "All I did was express gratitude for something Jackson did in the past, saving my sister's life. That's how we ended up in this situation." Henry nodded gravely. "It's made quite a stir. Teresa is pushing to exclude philanthropic clauses from the contract, but Jackson wants them. Delaney here is torn because it could affect the financial outcome." Delaney cleared his throat. "Harrington Industries does want a positive image. Perhaps including philanthropic clauses wouldn't be the financial disaster Teresa imagines. But how can we be sure?" Ruby looked at him, startled by the question. "All I know is that if there's profit at stake, it might not match the joy of helping someone who truly needs it. A life saved is priceless. Jackson understands that better than anyone else in his family." Her words hung in the air, and Henry offered a small nod. Delaney seemed thoughtful, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "This is complicated," he muttered, then glanced at Henry. "But maybe you're right. There could be a long-term benefit to aligning with philanthropic values." Ruby almost couldn't believe this discussion was happening in front of her. She was just a waitress on probation, yet here she was, influencing the decisions of high-powered men. It felt surreal. She hesitated, wanting to say more, but Henry offered a gentle smile. "Thank you, Ruby," he said, voice warm. "That was all we needed." She stood, smoothing her apron. "Thank you for hearing me out." Quietly, she stepped away, returning to her assigned section, her mind ablaze with disbelief. She replayed the words in her head. "A life saved is priceless." That truth had guided her impulsive actions, and perhaps now it was resonating in corners of power she never imagined. Ruby managed to finish her shift without further incidents, but the undercurrent of anxiety never left. After closing, she slipped out into the crisp Chicago night, the city lights reflecting off the pavement. She glanced at her phone for any messages from Ashley or Jackson. Nothing yet. She pushed her hands deeper into her coat pockets and headed to the bus stop. The following day, she woke to a barrage of worried texts from Ashley, asking about rumors concerning a fight with some rich lady. Ruby wanted to reassure her younger sister, but wasn't sure how. Instead, she typed out a vague reply, "It's a complicated situation, but I'm okay. I promise to explain soon." Determined to clear her head, Ruby decided to walk the short distance to visit her mother at the convalescent center where she was receiving ongoing medical treatment. While her mother dozed, Ruby sat by the bedside, thinking of the day Ashley nearly drowned. That memory, usually so frightening, now carried a certain peace because Jackson had been there to save her. She realized how easily life could pivot on a single moment of bravery. Leaving the center, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a nearby lamppost. Jackson was there, wearing a casual jacket and jeans, his posture stiff with anticipation. She blinked in surprise. "Jackson, how did you know I'd be here?" He approached with a tentative smile. "Henry mentioned you sometimes visit your mother during your off hours. I needed to talk to someone who understands what I'm going through." Ruby felt a flutter of concern. What happened? Did the signing not go as planned? Jackson let out a long sigh. "The contracts are signed, minus most of the philanthropic clauses I proposed. My parents refused to budge, and even Henry couldn't push too hard without risking a family-wide legal war. They let me add a small scholarship initiative, but it's nowhere near what I hoped for." Ruby's chest tightened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Jackson. You tried so hard." He shrugged, bitterness creeping into his tone. "It's not enough. They basically told me to accept the scraps or step down from my role in the company. I'm stuck, Ruby. And now Teresa is threatening to blackball you again if I keep pushing the charity angle." Ruby's heart pounded at the mention of new threats. "But Henry said he'd protect me. I know, he will, as best he can. But Teresa's not above using underhanded methods. She's spoken to influential friends in various industries. One slip-up from you, and she'll make sure you can't get another job." He exhaled, voice trembling with frustration. "I want to break free from them, but they've surrounded me with legal entanglements, brand obligations, and controlling shares." Ruby swallowed the rising lump in her throat. It sounded insurmountable. "Is there really no way out?" Jackson jammed his hands into his pockets. "It feels like a wall too high to climb. I've got enough personal savings to walk away from the family business, but Teresa and Douglas would drag this out in the courts." They tarnish any philanthropic endeavor I try to start on my own, claiming trademark violations or conflicts of interest. It's crazy. Ruby thought of her own life, scraping by, always looking over her shoulder, trying not to make enemies. She understood the weight of obligations, though on a different scale. I wish I had an answer. Is there anyone else on your side? He considered this. Henry, partly, but he has to tread carefully. My sister Charlotte is firmly on our parents' side, and I'm not sure about my father anymore. He's always behind the scenes, manipulating. Maybe Uncle Henry can help me carve out a legal path to do my own philanthropy, but it won't be soon or easy. They stood in the chilly air, traffic rumbling in the distance. Ruby realized that as daunting as her struggles were, Jackson's burden might be equally heavy, if not heavier. You shouldn't have to fight alone, she said softly. Maybe we can figure out a way together, some angle they haven't considered. He met her gaze, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Your support means more than you know. I just worry you'll get caught in the crossfire. She shivered as a sudden gust of wind ripped through the street. I'm already in it, aren't I? Jackson managed a small smile. Yeah, I guess you are. They walked a block together, neither speaking much. The city lights cast shifting patterns on the sidewalk, and for a moment, Ruby found solace in Jackson's presence, a reminder that, despite the looming obstacles, they had forged a bond. Still, as they turned a corner, she couldn't help but wonder if the wall they both faced was indeed too high to climb. The next evening, Ruby returned to Bellini's, nerves still frayed. She mentally replayed her conversation with Jackson, worrying about the family's power and Teresa's threats, yet she forced herself to walk through the doors, head held high. She couldn't afford to quit, and Henry's partial protection was their best bet for now. Once in the kitchen, Linda greeted her with a warm hug, an uncharacteristic display of affection that made Ruby's eyes sting with sudden tears. Heard you've had quite a time lately, Linda whispered. Martin told me you're on probation, but I'm glad you're still here. Ruby nodded, swallowing her emotions. Feels like I'm walking a tightrope. Linda gave her a reassuring pat on the back. Just keep going. Sometimes even tightropes lead to better places. With the dinner crowd trickling in, Ruby occupied herself by seating patrons and taking orders for a lively group celebrating a birthday. Between courses, she noticed Henry slip quietly through the main entrance, scanning the restaurant. He didn't have the usual grand entrance of a VIP this time. He appeared almost cautious. She watched from a distance as he spoke briefly to Martin, who then directed him to a discreet corner table. After taking an order for drinks at another table, Ruby hesitated, remembering the probation rules. She wasn't supposed to serve Harringtons directly. But Henry, catching sight of her, motioned her over anyway. She approached cautiously. Mr. Harrington, good evening. May I help you with anything? Henry gestured to the empty seat across from him. Sit for a moment, please. Ruby glanced around, half expecting Martin to admonish her, but the manager was busy chatting with another customer. Reluctantly, she took a seat, balancing her order pad on her lap. Henry leaned forward, voice low. I had a talk with Jackson today. He's frustrated, obviously, but I believe we can make incremental progress. I've convinced Teresa to allow a small fund for educational grants, even if it's mostly symbolic at this point. He grimaced. It's not what Jackson envisioned, but it's a start, and we can expand over time, especially if we gather public support. Ruby felt a spark of hope. So the philanthropic angle isn't entirely dead. He shook his head. Not entirely. But Teresa and Douglas are looking for any misstep to stifle it. I want you to know that Jackson and I are trying to keep your name out of future disputes, especially since you're on thin ice here. He paused, sincerity in his gaze. You gave Jackson the courage to push for more. That's not lost on him or on me. A wave of relief and pride washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I just feel bad I might have caused him more trouble." Henry smiled sadly. He wanted to fight this battle. You just reminded him why it's worth fighting. Don't lose heart. He glanced at his watch. "I've got a brief meeting downtown tonight, so I won't stay. But I wanted to let you know we made a little headway." Ruby rose, tucking her order pad under her arm. "It means a lot that you came to tell me." He gave a tight nod, then slipped out as quietly as he'd arrived. Ruby felt lighter somehow, buoyed by the news of a small victory. Maybe the philanthropic clause wasn't as doomed as Jackson feared. Maybe they weren't as alone as they thought. The rest of her shift passed smoothly. No drama, no furious calls from Teresa. She served a handful of demanding patrons, but their attitudes paled in comparison to the Harrington family's theatrics. She even earned a couple of generous tips that helped soothe her financial anxieties. Near closing time, Linda found her sweeping the floor near the bar. "You look happier tonight," Linda observed, leaning on a mop. "Good day?" Ruby nodded, letting a small smile show. "Small steps forward. I'll take what I can get." Linda gave an approving nod. "Sometimes that's all we need." By the time the doors closed, Ruby felt a cautious optimism. Yes, Teresa was still out there, possibly plotting new ways to intimidate her. And yes, Jackson remained entangled in a corporate quagmire. But they had an ally in Henry and a foot in the door for philanthropic work. Locking up for the night, Ruby stepped into the brisk air. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Hey sis, finals are coming up. Wish me luck." Ruby typed a quick response, her heart swelling with gratitude that Ashley was healthy and forging her own path. The memory of the lake still haunted her sometimes, but it also fueled her determination. If Jackson hadn't acted then, where would they all be? She headed to the bus stop, replaying Henry's words. "We made a little headway. After so many setbacks, even a modest gain felt like a triumph." She allowed herself to believe that one day, both she and Jackson might stand on more stable ground. Perhaps this entire ordeal, painful as it was, could pave the way for something better. For them, for those needing scholarships, and for the quiet hope she carried within her heart. In the days that followed, Ruby clung to her thin thread of hope. She balanced shifts at Bellini's and the diner, carefully adhering to every rule at the restaurant to avoid giving Martin a reason to fire her. Teresa and Charlotte stayed out of sight, though a rumor circulated among the staff that they were planning a lavish celebration soon. No details provided. Jackson occasionally texted her, sharing updates and frustrations about the push for philanthropic funding. The tension underlying it all felt like a ticking clock. One afternoon, Linda pulled Ruby aside. "We have a special event booking tonight, a private party, though Martin hasn't said much. We need all hands on deck, so you'll be working a busier station than usual. Think you can handle it?" Ruby's stomach lurched at the possibility that this private party might be a Harrington function, but she squared her shoulders. "I'll do my best." When evening fell, the restaurant buzzed with heightened activity. Extra staff polished every glass and rearranged table settings with meticulous care. The sense of anticipation was palpable. Linda flitted between the kitchen and dining area, giving instructions, while Martin ran through his to-do list in quick, clipped statements. Around 7 p.m., expensive cars began arriving out front. Ruby positioned herself discreetly, watching from a side station. A swirl of well-dressed guests entered, chattering about mergers and market expansions. Her pulse sped up at the sight of Teresa Harrington stepping elegantly through the doors, wearing a satin gown that screamed wealth. Right behind her was Douglas, face set in a proud expression. Charlotte also appeared, giving instructions to staff about seating arrangements. This had all the hallmarks of a high-profile Harrington affair. Ruby braced for a confrontation, but Teresa merely ignored her, as though she were invisible. Martin guided the family to the private room. Ruby exhaled, relieved that at least they wouldn't be seated in her section. She doubted Teresa would let the restaurant remain peaceful for long, but so far, no confrontation had erupted. As the evening wore on, Ruby noticed Jackson hadn't arrived. She felt a pang of worry. Had Teresa cut him out of the celebration, or was he choosing not to attend? Between taking orders, she slipped away to check her phone, hoping for a message. Nothing. She told herself not to panic. Maybe he was simply late. An hour later, the private room buzzed with applause. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass, and a hush fell. Curious diners in the main area craned their necks. Ruby overheard bits of a toast, Teresa lauding the success of the newly finalized acquisition, praising Douglas and Charlotte, referencing the Harrington legacy. No mention of Jackson. Ruby's chest tightened in sympathy for him. He'd poured his energy into that contract, desperately trying to carve out philanthropic clauses. Now, it sounded like the family was taking credit without acknowledging his input. She shook off her frustration and resumed delivering entrees to a table of bankers. The last thing she needed was to stir trouble. Mid-shift, a wave of whispers spread among the staff. Jackson had arrived at the front door. Ruby found herself caught in a swirl of busyness, unable to get a proper glimpse, but she sensed the tension escalate. Teresa, apparently, stepped out of the private room to greet him. Some said they heard raised voices from the corridor. Not long after, Ruby saw Jackson stride past the main dining area, eyes blazing with anger. He disappeared into the private room, ignoring the stares of curious onlookers. Ruby's stomach twisted. She thought about the steps forward they'd made, how fragile it all felt. If Teresa provoked him now, the conflict might erupt again in spectacular fashion. She served a final round of desserts to one table, her mind racing. Should she risk stepping near the private room to see what was happening? A part of her feared Teresa might pounce the moment she appeared. Another part recalled Linda's encouragement. Sometimes you have to take a risk. As she deliberated, Linda appeared at her side, pressing a glass of water into her hand. "You look like you're going to faint," she whispered. "Drink this." "Whatever's going on in there, it's not your fight alone." Ruby sipped the water, nodding gratefully. But deep down, she felt a responsibility, maybe even a calling, to stand by Jackson. The chatter from the private room crescendoed into something that sounded like an argument. A sense of dread settled over her. Martin rushed by, arms full of empty plates, and mouthed, "Stay put." Clearly, he anticipated drama. Ruby watched him duck into the private room, presumably to calm tempers. For a solid 10 minutes, the noise ebbed and flowed behind those closed doors. Finally, Martin emerged, looking flushed. He gestured for Ruby to come over, voice tense. "They're about to announce something and they want all staff on standby for further instructions. Just be on alert." She set down her glass of water, heart hammering. Announce what? She could only imagine Teresa making some triumphant statement about their success, or possibly humiliating Jackson publicly. She glanced at the corridor leading to the private room, then back at Linda, who gave her a small nod of reassurance. A storm was gathering, and Ruby felt certain everything they'd fought for, her job, Jackson's philanthropic vision, even their fragile bond, was on the line. She wasn't sure how it would end, but she knew she had to be ready. A hush fell over the main dining area as Teresa Harrington swept out of the private room, head held high. She paused at the threshold, rapping a polished nail against her champagne flute. The chatter among their assembled friends and business associates died down in seconds. Every eye in Bellini's seemed to pivot toward her. Ruby, hovering near the bar, felt her pulse pound in her ears. Martin stood stiffly behind Teresa, looking uneasy. Linda caught Ruby's gaze and signaled for her to remain calm. A dozen thoughts spun through Ruby's mind. Was Teresa about to humiliate Jackson, make a dramatic statement about the merger, or even announce something about Ruby herself? Clearing her throat, Teresa let her voice ring clear and confident. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. As you know, our family has been celebrating the completion of a significant corporate acquisition, one that will usher the Harrington name into new avenues of prosperity. A flurry of polite applause rippled through the crowd. Teresa offered a gracious nod, her diamond earrings catching the warm light. "But there's more," she continued. "We wish to share an important development concerning our future." Ruby's stomach lurched. She saw Jackson standing a few steps behind his mother, arms folded over his chest. His expression betrayed a quiet storm of frustration. Charlotte, next to him, wore a triumphant smirk that Ruby found unsettling. Teresa continued, gesturing for the guests' attention. This acquisition was hard-won, requiring sacrifice from all involved. In recognition of that, and thanks to the diligence of my husband Douglas, our daughter Charlotte, and the entire board, we are proud to announce a new direction for our philanthropic endeavors under the Harrington Foundation. She spoke the words as if they tasted sour. We will establish a small educational fund for deserving students in need, an initiative led by Harrington Industries. Ruby blinked in surprise. That sounded like Jackson's plan, but scaled down, barely a fraction of what he'd envisioned. The applause was polite but subdued, as if many of these wealthy guests cared more about hearing the next big moneymaker than a philanthropic footnote. Teresa's voice sharpened slightly. We hope this modest step will demonstrate our family's commitment to the broader community. Details will be forthcoming. The moment she finished, Charlotte took the stage, figuratively at least. We thank everyone for their support. Now, please enjoy the refreshments and music. There's much to celebrate. The crowd broke into scattered cheers, and Teresa signaled the quartet by the far wall to start playing again. Ruby glanced at Jackson, noticing how he clutched the edge of a nearby chair, anger evident in the tight set of his jaw. He didn't move or try to address the audience. It was obvious Teresa had orchestrated this entire event to control the narrative, giving Jackson's philanthropic push only the barest acknowledgement. An uneasy restlessness settled in Ruby's chest. She wanted to step forward, to tell the crowd that Jackson had championed a far more expansive and heartfelt philanthropic plan. But Martin's stern look from across the room reminded her she was on probation. Any sudden move might be the last she ever made at Bellini's. As the music swelled, guests mingled and chatted, their polished laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. Teresa disappeared back into the private room, Charlotte at her side. Jackson lingered in the doorway before heading the same way. Ruby noticed he was limping slightly, as though carrying an invisible weight with every step. Linda approached Ruby, a tray of fresh pastries in hand. "That was tense," she murmured, setting the tray on the bar. "At least they mentioned some educational fund. Maybe it's a start." Ruby nodded, her voice hushed. "But it's nowhere near what Jackson wanted. You could see it in his face." Linda squeezed her arm gently. "Hang in there. He might need your support soon." Ruby resumed work, delivering trays of canapes to well-heeled guests gossiping about the Harrington drama. Whispers carried through the crowd. Some praised Teresa's magnanimity, others rolled their eyes at the minimal gesture. Ruby's heart ached, knowing Jackson likely felt betrayed in his own celebration. Close to midnight, the gathering began to dwindle. Many guests left congratulatory messages for the Harringtons, promising future collaborations. Ruby did a final pass through the main area, collecting empty glasses. She glimpsed Jackson by the entrance, gazing out into the night. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, as though he'd just escaped a choking collar. Summoning her courage, Ruby approached him, keeping her voice low. "Jackson, hey, are you all right?" He turned, eyes heavy with disappointment. "That was all theater, Ruby. My mother used the word philanthropy like it was a PR maneuver, never letting anyone see how watered down the plane actually is." Ruby's breath caught. "I'm sorry. It must feel like a betrayal." He finished for her, bitterness in every syllable. "But I can't confront her now, not after she's pulled half the city's elite into the same room. She made sure I couldn't speak freely." Ruby glanced around. "Maybe we can find a moment to talk in private." He nodded, exhaling. "Yes, but not here. I don't want to cause another scene." He hesitated, then gently touched her arm. "There's more going on behind the scenes. Let me explain later." His tone made it clear that something else had transpired, something Teresa either threatened or dangled in front of him. Ruby gave a shaky nod, anxious about the road ahead. The evening might have ended for the guests, but for Jackson and her, it felt like a spark igniting a powder keg that had yet to detonate. The following morning, Ruby showed up at the diner for her early shift. She was accustomed to the clatter of plates, the hiss of the coffee machine, and the steady flow of blue-collar workers grabbing breakfast before clocking in. Yet her mind stayed fixed on the events at Bellini's the night before. The forced announcement of a token educational fund echoed in her thoughts, and Jackson's pained expression refused to leave her memory. Midway through wiping down a booth, she heard her phone buzz. A quick glance revealed a message from Jackson. "Meet me near the waterfront at noon. Need to talk." Her heart did a small flip. She texted back a simple yes, then refocused on customers, determined not to let her personal drama cost her tips. By noon, she clocked out and made her way toward Chicago's lakeside promenade. Bright sunlight glinted off the water, and seagulls squawked overhead. She walked until she spotted Jackson waiting near a railing, staring out at the waves. Gone was the tailored suit. He wore a casual jacket, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He offered a faint smile as she approached. "Thanks for meeting me." Ruby nodded, gripping the railing beside him, the breeze tossing loose strands of her hair across her face. "You sounded urgent." He let out a slow breath. "Last night, after the event, Teresa pulled me aside. She was furious that I showed up late and wouldn't play along with the big show. She told me she has documents ready to legally block me from further involvement in the Harrington Foundation if I don't toe the line. I'll lose any authority over philanthropic decisions, my one area of leverage, if I don't behave." Ruby felt her pulse jump. "They'd cut you out of your own family's foundation." Jackson nodded. "They're calling it a revocation of trust. Basically, if I can't comply with their version of events, they'll seal me out. And of course, they mentioned you, threatening to push for your dismissal or worse if I keep stirring trouble." A tremor ran through her. She'd feared as much. "I don't want you to sacrifice your position on my account," she whispered, though the thought of him surrendering his beliefs to satisfy Teresa and Douglas was unbearable. He turned toward her, voice tight with conviction. "This isn't just about you or me. It's about doing what's right. If I give in, they'll keep making decisions that are all about profit, ignoring the people they could help. It's not acceptable." Ruby looked at the water, remembering how he once dove in to save Ashley without regard for the risk. That same fearless spirit shimmered in his eyes now. "What do we do?" she asked softly. Jackson grimaced. "Henry's been trying to negotiate behind the scenes, but Teresa refuses to budge. There's an upcoming board meeting in 2 days, where they'll finalize the structure of the Harrington Foundation." If I don't show up and endorse their plan, they'll lock me out. If I do show up and challenge them, they might retaliate immediately. Ruby's mind spun. She pictured Teresa's power, her money, her connections. Then she glanced at Jackson, whose gaze was steady despite his frustration. "You're willing to fight them in front of the board. That could get ugly." He nodded. "I am. And I need to gather proof that a more comprehensive philanthropic approach is not just ethical, but also financially viable. If I can present data, impact studies, potential long-term benefits for corporate reputation, I might sway enough board members to side with me." She realized what he was implying. "You want me to help? I'm just a waitress." He touched her hand lightly, warmth in his expression. "You're more than that. You've been working 2 jobs, to send Ashley to college and to support your mother's medical bills. You know firsthand how financial assistance and scholarships can change lives. It's your real-life experience that might speak to board members more than abstract financial models." Ruby's throat tightened. She never imagined she'd have a voice in a corporate boardroom. "But what if no one listens, or if Teresa shuts me down?" Jackson shrugged. "They might. But we might persuade a few. Henry says not all board members are as cold-hearted as my parents. Some just need to see a compelling case. Besides, I've got financial forecasts showing that robust philanthropy can improve a company's brand, attract investors who value social responsibility, and open new markets." Despite her nerves, Ruby felt the faint stirrings of excitement. "So we present data and personal testimony. Show them that it's good business to do good." "Exactly," Jackson said with a determined nod. "We won't have long to speak, and Teresa will likely fight us every step of the way. But if we succeed, I might retain control of my seat on the foundation, ensuring real change happens. And if we fail, at least we'll go down fighting for something worthwhile." Ruby let the breeze wash over her, cooling her tension. "All right," she said, heart pounding. "Tell me what I need to do." A flicker of relief crossed his features. "We'll gather everything we can. Stories, numbers, examples. Talk to Linda, to any scholarship beneficiaries you know, maybe even your sister Ashley. Show that small acts of help can transform entire lives." The sun glinted off the water, momentarily dazzling Ruby's vision. She thought of her mother's struggles, Ashley's near tragedy, her own endless shifts. This was bigger than them. This was about giving others the chance she never had. Turning to Jackson, she found courage in the steady set of his jaw. "All right, let's do it," she said firmly, feeling a surge of conviction. She didn't yet know how they'd stand up to Teresa's might, but she knew one thing: they wouldn't face it alone. With the board meeting just 2 days away, Jackson and Ruby threw themselves into a whirlwind of preparation. Each day after Ruby finished her shifts, she met Jackson at a small conference room Henry had arranged in a lesser-used Harrington office building. The space was humble by corporate standards: a few chairs, a battered desk, and flickering fluorescent lights. Ruby arrived one evening, arms full of printed materials, statistics on educational grants, success stories from non-profits, and articles about companies whose philanthropic ventures boosted their public image. Jackson was already there, laptop open, studying spreadsheets. His face lit up briefly when he saw her. "Thank you," he said, taking the stack of papers. "There's so much to go through." They spent hours combing through data, highlighting points that could sway hardened executives. Ruby's personal experiences offered a raw authenticity that Jackson's polished numbers lacked. She recounted how a small scholarship had changed the trajectory of Ashley's life. She told stories of tips from kind customers that had carried her through tough months. Each anecdote was another piece in a puzzle meant to show the board that real philanthropy isn't just altruistic. It can be transformative and, ultimately, good business. As the clock ticked close to midnight, Jackson leaned back in his chair, massaging the bridge of his nose. "I keep thinking about how Teresa and Douglas will spin this," he murmured. "They'll say it's too costly, that it diverts resources, that we can't quantify emotional returns." Ruby set down her pen. "I'm no corporate expert, but if they're so concerned about image and profit, maybe we highlight how philanthropic actions attract new customers and investors who care about social responsibility. My phone's full of articles about this new wave of socially conscious consumerism." Jackson's eyes glinted. "Yes, let's compile that. I'll work it into the presentation." He tapped away at the laptop, then paused to glance at her. "I need you to speak too, if you're willing. A personal testimony could cut through the usual corporate noise." Ruby's stomach fluttered with nerves. "Me, in front of all those board members." She imagined Teresa's icy glare drilling into her, and an involuntary shiver ran down her spine. He reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "They need to hear a voice that isn't trapped in their echo chamber. If you talk about the real impact of scholarships and how close we came to losing Ashley, that kind of honesty might strike a chord." She nodded slowly. "I can do that. But what if Teresa tries to shut me down?" Jackson exhaled. "I'll make sure you have the floor. Henry will back us. And if Teresa cuts us off, well, we'll have done everything we could." They worked a bit longer, refining bullet points and anticipating counter-arguments. The tension in the small room felt electric, a sense that they were building a lifeline for the philanthropic future Jackson so passionately believed in. By the time they wrapped up, it was nearing 1 a.m. Jackson insisted on walking Ruby to her car. The downtown streets were empty, glowing under tall lamps. They strolled side by side, the quiet city enveloping them. A half-moon hung above the skyscrapers, silvering the edges of their steps. "I never expected to find someone who'd fight so hard beside me," Jackson said softly, breaking the hush. "Especially someone from such a different world than mine." Ruby's cheeks warmed. "You saved my sister's life, and you barely even knew her. You have no idea what that meant to us. Fighting for your cause. It's the least I can do. And maybe it's our cause now." He turned to her, a flicker of gratitude in his tired eyes. "It means a lot. Truly." They reached her car, and for a moment, neither moved. The distant hum of traffic and the faint rustle of wind made the evening feel intimate. Ruby felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation pressing on them both, but she also sensed a shared conviction that overshadowed her fear. "We'll get through this," she whispered, as if reassuring herself. Jackson nodded. "We will. Tomorrow I'll run more projections, then finalize the slides. You rest up. Your part of the presentation is just as crucial." She unlocked her car and slid behind the wheel, giving him a small wave as she started the engine. Driving home under the sparse city lights, she couldn't deny the twist of anxiety in her chest. But there was determination too, a clarity she'd lacked for so long. Together, she and Jackson were taking on a powerful family empire, risking everything from reputations to livelihoods. Yet for the first time in years, Ruby felt a sense of purpose that dwarfed her fears. As she parked outside her modest apartment, she caught sight of a note pinned to her door, a reminder from the landlord about overdue rent. Normally, that would send her into a spiral of worry. Instead, she found herself thinking of all they'd accomplished so far, and all they might still achieve. Fear didn't vanish, but it receded just enough to let hope breathe. The board meeting day arrived with an almost ominous stillness. Overcast skies pressed down on Chicago's skyline, as if mirroring Ruby's anxious mood. She'd gotten up early to run through her remarks, practicing in the mirror until her voice grew hoarse. Her heart hammered so loudly she half expected her neighbors to complain about the noise. Jackson sent a brief text around 7 a.m. "Board meets at 10. I'll meet you in the lobby at 9:30. Stay strong." She grabbed her worn blazer from the closet, smoothing out the wrinkles as best she could. It wasn't high fashion, but it would have to do. She considered calling Ashley for moral support, but decided it might only heighten her sister's worries. Better to share the outcome once she knew where things stood. By 9:25, Ruby was stepping into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Harrington Tower. Modern art sculptures lined the foyer, and the faint smell of polished marble lingered in the air. She spotted Jackson across the room, wearing a tailored suit. His shoulders were tense, but he managed a small, reassuring smile when he saw her. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low. "Henry's already upstairs, trying to gauge the mood. My parents might still be in their offices." Ruby swallowed, gazing around at the suits passing in and out of the elevator banks. "I've never been in a place like this. It's overwhelming." Jackson gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can do this. Remember, we have facts and we have heart. That's more powerful than you realize." At 9:45, they rode the elevator to the 50th floor. The corridor was lined with frosted glass walls and discreet doors leading to executive suites. They found the boardroom entrance, a pair of heavy doors flanked by two tall potted plants. Henry waited by the threshold, looking pale but resolute. He gave Ruby a polite nod. "Glad you made it. The board members are inside, some sipping coffee, some reviewing documents. Teresa and Douglas are in there too. Charlotte's running late, but she'll show." "We should go in soon." Ruby gripped her folder of notes so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She forced herself to breathe deeply. "You have a story to tell. You have a purpose. And that might..." Her focus went straight to the people seated around the table. Powerful men and women flipping through documents, tapping pens, or checking their phones. Teresa sat near one end, impeccably dressed, a slight curl of disdain on her lips. Douglas occupied the seat beside her, scanning a stack of papers. Jackson directed Ruby to two empty chairs across from them, and Henry took a seat near Jackson, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "Good morning," Henry began, voice firm. "We're here to finalize the charter for the Harrington Foundation, ensuring it aligns with the company's interests and philanthropic goals." Teresa arched an eyebrow. "Yes, philanthropic. As agreed. A modest educational fund. We have a draft proposal ready to sign." She nodded at an aide, who began distributing copies. Jackson clasped his hands. "Before we proceed, I want to address the scope of that proposal. I'm pushing for a more comprehensive initiative that fosters ongoing support for community colleges, vocational training, and scholarship programs, rather than a mere token donation." A murmur rose around the table. Several board members exchanged glances. Teresa pursed her lips. "We've been over this, Jackson. The budget is limited, and we must prioritize the merger's aftermath. The foundation can't divert extensive resources to unprofitable endeavors." That was Ruby's cue. Nervous energy pulsed through her. She cleared her throat and stood, though her legs wobbled. "Excuse me, my name is Ruby Phillips." Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to press on. "I'm not an executive or a shareholder. I'm just someone who knows the value of educational support firsthand." She recounted her story in concise, heartfelt detail, how Ashley nearly drowned and how Jackson's unselfish act saved her sister's life, how a small scholarship enabled Ashley to attend nursing school, which could never have happened otherwise, how countless people in Chicago struggle daily, her own mother among them, whose lives might be forever altered by even a modest scholarship or grant. "I understand the importance of profits," she concluded, voice steadier now, "but I also know that real philanthropy isn't charity for charity's sake. It's an investment in the well-being of our communities. When families thrive, they become customers, contributors, innovators. A hush fell. Ruby could almost feel Teresa's glare, but she avoided looking that way. One board member, a silver-haired woman in a tailored grey suit, leaned forward. "That's a compelling story, Miss Phillips," she said. "Jackson, I'd like to hear how you intend to structure these programs." Jackson launched into a presentation of spreadsheets and projections, showcasing long-term returns on brand image and employee loyalty. He cited real-world examples of corporations that saw measurable gains in reputation and market share through authentic philanthropic engagement. Ruby watched the board members' reactions. Some nodded in cautious agreement, others maintained impassive stares. Teresa fumed silently, arms crossed, while Douglas kept flipping through the pages with an air of dismissal. At one point, Charlotte swept in late, took a seat near Teresa, and rolled her eyes at Jackson's data. Then came the questions, pointed, relentless. They asked about budgets, timelines, accountability measures. Jackson responded calmly, referencing the thick report they'd compiled. Ruby's chest tightened each time Teresa lobbed a sarcastic comment, but Henry stepped in, reinforcing Jackson's points. An hour passed, like a blur of words and figures. Finally, the silver-haired board member spoke again, looking around at her colleagues. "It seems we have two options. Accept the minimal educational fund proposed by Teresa and Douglas, or approve Jackson's broader philanthropic initiative. We need a vote." Teresa's eyes narrowed. Douglas sat rigidly, as if the mere suggestion of a larger program offended him. Ruby's pulse throbbed with anticipation. This was it, the moment that might define not just Jackson's place in the company, but the fate of scholarships for countless young people. The boardroom fell into tense silence. A handful of members exchanged hushed words, referencing the documents laid out before them. The silver-haired woman, Ms. Alvarez, as Ruby noted from her nameplate, prepared to call for a show of hands. Across the table, Teresa's knuckles were white against the pages. She spoke up, voice clipped. "Before this vote proceeds, I want the board to remember that Harrington Industries has a duty to preserve profitability for its shareholders. My son's philanthropic ambitions, while noble, risk siphoning resources from more vital company operations." Jackson's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I've explained how strategic giving can actually boost profitability. We'll allocate a portion of the new merger's gains, invest in scholarships, and watch our public image improve. It's not a burden, it's an opportunity." A middle-aged man to Teresa's left cleared his throat. "I'd like to ask Miss Phillips one more question, if that's all right." He turned to Ruby. "You speak passionately about how scholarships changed your family's life, but do you believe Harrington Industries bears personal responsibility for other people's hardships?" Ruby felt every gaze land on her. She inhaled, choosing her words with care. "I believe that when people in positions of power have the means to create opportunities for those less fortunate, it's not just about responsibility, it's about vision. The world can't thrive if we keep wealth in a narrow circle. By offering real support, Harrington Industries can build loyalty, respect, and even new consumer bases. It's both compassionate and strategic." The man pressed his lips together thoughtfully, then gave a slow nod. Mrs. Alvarez scanned the table. "All right, let's put this to a vote. There are two proposals before us." "Wait!" Teresa interjected, her voice brittle. She pinned Jackson with a glare that spoke volumes. This board might be swayed by heartstring appeals, but Harrington Industries has endured for decades under tried-and-true methods. If we adopt Jackson's plan and it fails, we risk reputational damage far worse than not doing it at all. We've seen corporations ridiculed when philanthropic ventures go awry. Jackson met her glare head-on. And we've seen corporations lauded when they make a real difference. You just refuse to believe that might be true." Teresa stood, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "I'll not watch you tarnish the legacy your father and I built. If the board insists on ignoring my counsel, I'll have no part in it." She glanced at Douglas, who offered a nod of solidarity. Charlotte looked momentarily unsure, but shifted closer to Teresa. A flurry of whispers followed. Miss Alvarez rapped her pen on the table. "Very well, let's maintain order. We vote now. All in favor of implementing Jackson Harrington's broader philanthropic initiative, raise your hands." Ruby's breath caught as she watched hands lift. Henry went first, Ms. Alvarez second, then 3 more hands hesitated before rising. It was close, too close for comfort. Ruby's heart hammered while counting each vote, realizing that Teresa's opposition could sway the tie if enough members sided with her. After what felt like an eternity, Ms. Alvarez announced the tally. With 6 votes in favor and 5 against, Jackson's proposal has a slight majority. A wave of relief and disbelief flooded Ruby. Jackson exhaled audibly, shoulders sagging with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Henry offered a small, victorious smile. Teresa's face grew thunderous. "I see. So you've decided to undermine the very foundation of this corporation's success," she said icily. "Jackson, don't expect your father and me to stand by while you gamble the family name on untested do-goodery." Despite her fury, the vote stood. Miss Alvarez pressed a button on the intercom, calling in an aide to finalize the documentation. The board meeting dissolved into hushed side conversations, some members congratulating Jackson, while others offered cold acknowledgments. Teresa and Douglas hastily gathered their papers, refusing to meet Jackson's gaze. Ruby remained rooted to her chair, adrenaline coursing through her. When Teresa finally swept out, Charlotte trailing behind, the tension in the room eased. Jackson turned to Ruby, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. Pride, perhaps? Henry walked over, clapping Jackson on the shoulder. "You pulled it off, nephew. It was close, but a win's a win." He turned to Ruby, giving her a respectful nod. "And you, Miss Phillips, I doubt we'd have turned that corner without your testimony." "Thank you," Ruby smiled, heat blooming in her cheeks. "I'm just glad it worked." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "We have a lot of work to do now, drafting new guidelines, implementing actual scholarship programs, but at least we have a mandate from the board. They can't shut it down or push me aside anymore, not without going against a majority decision." The gravity of that victory began to sink in. They had won a crucial battle. But Ruby sensed that Teresa wouldn't surrender quietly. Even as relief washed over her, she braced for the next wave of retaliation. Still, for this moment, they'd crossed a threshold she once thought impossible. Martin was nowhere to be seen, and Ruby wondered how he would react, or Linda, who'd quietly cheered them on from the sidelines. She rose from her chair, hugging her folder as if it were a shield. "Congratulations," she whispered, meeting Jackson's gaze. He nodded, wearing a cautious but genuine smile. "We did it. Together." A subtle warmth bloomed in her chest at that word. Together. Ruby awoke the next morning feeling both lighter and strangely vulnerable. The board's decision to approve Jackson's broader philanthropic plan still felt surreal. She kept replaying the final tally in her head, remembering the moment Ms. Alvarez announced the vote in Jackson's favor. At the same time, she couldn't shake the memory of Teresa's furious glare as she stormed out of the boardroom. This was a victory, yes, but she sensed that the Harrington matriarch wasn't finished. Nonetheless, the day brought an unexpected sense of calm. Ruby arrived at Bellini's to find Linda bustling about, restocking wine racks and giving directions to the new hires. When Linda noticed Ruby hovering near the doorway, she waved her over with an enthusiastic grin. "I heard the news," Linda said, wagging a kitchen towel in triumph. "Sounds like Jackson won his battle in that fancy boardroom, huh?" Ruby nodded, trying to contain her excitement. It's a big step. The foundation is going forward with scholarships and more robust initiatives. Jackson already has a list of potential programs to fund. Linda gave a little cheer, pulling Ruby into a quick side hug. I'm proud of you for standing up and telling your story. That kind of courage doesn't come easy. Before Ruby could respond, Martin strode in, clipboard in hand. His brow furrowed as he scanned the day's schedule. Ever since the confrontation in the private dining room, Martin had tiptoed around Ruby, neither dismissing her nor offering much praise. Today was no exception. He cleared his throat, addressing Ruby with measured formality. You're on Section C this evening. We have a corporate group at Table 12. Let's keep everything running smoothly. Ruby accepted the assignment quietly. She guessed he was torn. On one hand, the Harringtons still held significant sway over Bellini's. On the other, Henry's support and Jackson's influence probably discouraged Martin from pushing Ruby around. She did her best to remain polite, picking up menus and extra silverware. It felt like a balancing act, but at least no one was threatening to fire her. As the evening shift progressed, Ruby noticed subtle changes in her interactions with customers. Some recognized her from whispered rumors about the waitress who stood up to the Harrington family. A few even made polite inquiries, wanting to know more about the philanthropic efforts she and Jackson were championing. Though Ruby wasn't keen on becoming a spectacle, she appreciated their genuine curiosity. In a quieter moment, she stepped into the back hallway to catch her breath. The day's adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a strange mix of relief and lingering uncertainty. She knew Teresa had lost the board vote, but Teresa's power, both socially and financially, was still formidable. Ruby's entire life, her family's welfare, her job, her future, remained uncomfortably tied to the whims of a woman who made no secret of her dislike. While Ruby sipped water from a paper cup, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Ashley. Got your message. OMG, you spoke in front of the Harrington board. Proud of you, sis. Finals are tough, but I'm pushing through. Call me soon. A wave of affection enveloped Ruby. She was reminded of why she'd risked her job in the first place, Ashley's well-being, her mother's health care, and the countless others who might benefit from an expanded scholarship fund. That reminder offered a fresh surge of purpose, washing away her doubts for the moment. Returning to the dining area, she passed by a table of regulars, an older couple who always requested a corner seat. They beckoned Ruby over to inquire about their dessert order, but the wife couldn't resist a kind remark. We've heard a rumor you're the reason that big-shot philanthropists decided to help fund a new scholarship program. Good for you, dear, Ruby smiled, feeling a small glow of pride. I just shared my story, she said softly. Jackson Harrington did the heavy lifting. The woman winked conspiratorially. Sometimes a person just needs a nudge in the right direction. The night wound down, and Ruby finished with a final table around closing time. While she collected stray dishes, she thought of Jackson. He was likely knee-deep in planning sessions, drafting proposals and scheduling meetings with potential partners. He'd texted her briefly that afternoon, promising a late-night call if he wasn't too swamped. She hoped the pressure wasn't overwhelming him. Eventually, the last customer departed, and Martin announced that Bellini's would lock its doors for the night. After tidying her section, Ruby retreated to the employees' lounge, sinking into a plastic chair. She peeled off her apron, feeling the ache in her feet and shoulders, yet also sensing a renewed flame inside, an awareness that her life was no longer just about survival. Linda popped in, grabbing her purse from a hook. You look tired but content, she observed, handing Ruby a small takeout container. A slice of leftover tiramisu. Go home, rest, and treat yourself. Ruby accepted the container, chuckling. Thanks, Linda. You're a lifesaver. She left Bellini's with a feeling of cautious optimism. The conflict with Teresa wasn't fully resolved, but for the moment, the philanthropic plan stood. Outside, the Chicago air was cool, and a sliver of moon hung in the sky. Ruby zipped her coat and made her way to the bus stop, letting a soft smile curl her lips. Yes, she felt renewed, buoyed by the sense that her actions had truly mattered. But she also felt vulnerable, aware that Teresa's anger still simmered. Each day would be a balancing act, forging ahead while watching her back. Yet the thought of a future filled with real possibilities, scholarships funded, young people given chances they'd otherwise miss, eased her worries. She'd rebuild her life day by day, no longer merely existing but shaping her destiny one brave step at a time. 3 days later, Ruby found herself walking the corridors of the convalescent center where her mother was receiving ongoing treatment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating the pale walls decorated with paintings of pastoral landscapes. Though the atmosphere felt sterile, Ruby treasured these visits. She always brought a small bouquet of fresh flowers, something bright to cheer up the room. Today, she carried chrysanthemums wrapped in crinkling paper. She paused outside her mother's door, mustering a smile. Inside, she found her mother propped up on pillows, flipping through a magazine. At the sound of Ruby's footsteps, her mother looked up, her face lighting with relief. "Hi, Mom," Ruby said, placing the flowers in a vase on the bedside table. "How are you feeling?" Her mother sighed. "Same old aches, but I'm getting by. These flowers are lovely." "Thank you." Ruby settled into the chair beside the bed, the vinyl seat squeaking under her. She hesitated a moment, then decided to share the recent developments. "I have news, kind of big news. Jackson Harrington and I, we managed to convince the Harrington board to fund a scholarship program." Her mother blinked in surprise. "That's the same man who saved Ashley, right?" She shook her head in near disbelief. "You convinced the Harringtons to do something charitable." A laugh bubbled out of Ruby. "Not all of them wanted to. His mother was dead set against it, but we got enough votes to push it through." For a moment, her mother just stared, her expression shifting from shock to pride. "Ruby, you never cease to amaze me. You and your sister, both so determined." Ruby reached for her mother's hand, feeling a swell of emotion. "It's not final. Teresa might still cause trouble, but for now, it's real progress." She spent the next hour talking about the scholarship plan, how it could potentially help someone like Ashley or even people in more dire circumstances. Her mother beamed, the conversation clearly lightening her spirits. When a nurse entered to check vitals, Ruby discreetly stepped out into the hallway, giving them space. Before she left, she promised to return soon. On the bus ride back, Ruby found herself pondering how drastically her worldview had shifted. A few weeks ago, her life revolved around double shifts, overdue bills, and a persistent sense that she was treading water. Now, she felt part of something bigger. Even if she remained a waitress at Bellini's, she had a say, albeit a small one, in how a powerful corporation approached philanthropy. Once back in her neighborhood, she stopped at the corner store for milk and bread. The cashier, an older man named Raoul, recognized her and asked if she was that waitress who got entangled with the Harringtons. The rumor mill, it seemed, had churned its way into every corner of the city. Ruby admitted she was, bracing for negative remarks, but Raoul only smiled and said, "Heard you're doing good things. Keep it up." Back at her apartment, she found a letter taped to the door, the latest statement for her mother's medical bills. Ruby braced herself, expecting the usual wave of dread. Instead, she quietly reminded herself that, while things were still tight, she now had an avenue to speak with Jackson or Henry about possible assistance programs. Maybe that was too bold a step, but at least there was a spark of hope on the horizon. Inside, she found her sister's textbooks piled high on the kitchen table. Ashley was staying with friends during finals, but would be back soon. Ruby smiled, imagining the look on Ashley's face when she learned how the scholarship fund might grow. The difference one act of generosity had made in their own lives could now ripple outward, touching countless others. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Jackson, sounding a bit breathless. "I'm stepping out of a meeting," he said. "The new foundation's guidelines are being drafted. We might need your input for real-life examples to share on our website." Ruby laughed softly. "Me, a spokesperson? That's a twist I never saw coming." "Life has a way of surprising us," he replied. She could almost hear him smiling through the phone. "How about we meet for coffee tomorrow? We can catch up and plan the next steps." Ruby agreed, feeling a small flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with corporate philanthropy. Ending the call, she rested the phone on the counter and glanced at Ashley's textbooks again. Her life was still filled with responsibilities and uncertainties, but she was gradually seeing them from a new vantage point, one shaped by hope, empowerment, and the belief that even the most ordinary among them could reshape entire destinies. Early the next morning, Ruby arrived at a cozy coffee shop tucked between towering office buildings. The scent of roasted beans greeted her as she stepped inside. Modern pendant lamps cast a warm glow over the polished wooden floors, and a steady hum of conversation filled the air. She spotted Jackson at a corner table, reviewing papers with a furrowed brow. He stood up when she approached, offering a small smile. "Glad you could make it." She set her purse on a chair, noticing he'd already ordered 2 cappuccinos. "Thanks. I could use the caffeine." They sat and sipped their drinks. Jackson spread out several documents on the table, drafts of guidelines for the new scholarship program, notes on potential community partnerships, references to local non-profits. Ruby felt a shiver of excitement as she recognized data she'd helped compile. Jackson began pointing out sections. "We have an opportunity to collaborate with a city council program that identifies bright students in underserved areas. The idea is to provide tuition assistance plus mentorship." "That sounds fantastic," Ruby said, leaning forward. "Mentorship is crucial. Some kids just need someone to show them the ropes." Jackson nodded eagerly. "I agree. We're also looking into partnerships with a couple of vocational schools. Not everyone wants a 4-year degree. Some prefer trades or specialized certifications, and there's a huge demand for skilled workers." Ruby smiled at how animated he'd become. "I can't believe how far we've come in such a short time. It's like a whole new world." A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "We still have to navigate Teresa and Charlotte's pushback. They haven't rescinded their public support for the foundation, but they're lobbying behind the scenes to keep it minimal. Henry's working to broker a compromise." She glanced out the window, where morning commuters rushed by on the sidewalk. "I guess we do what we can. Even if the foundation starts small, it could make a difference to someone like Ashley once was. A kid with dreams and no resources." Jackson reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I don't think I've properly thanked you, not just for testifying at the board meeting, but for reminding me why any of this matters. I've lived my whole life in this realm of wealth and social politicking. You cut through all that noise." Ruby felt her cheeks warm. "I never thought I'd help shape a scholarship program. It's humbling. But honestly, it's Linda and my sister and so many others who gave me the courage to speak up." They discussed potential outreach events, ways to invite applications, and methods to ensure the scholarships reach the right students. Jackson scribbled notes, occasionally referencing a timeline on his phone. Ruby was struck by how natural it felt, sitting here, planning philanthropic endeavors with a man she'd barely known a few weeks ago, yet it also felt powerfully right. Midway through their conversation, Jackson's phone buzzed with a call from Henry. He answered and stepped outside, pacing on the sidewalk while Ruby stayed behind, sipping the last of her cappuccino. She watched through the glass as Jackson's expressions shifted from concern to relief, then a reluctant nod. Finally, he returned, tucking his phone into his pocket. "Good news, I hope," she asked. He exhaled. "A bit of both. Henry says Teresa's not pushing an outright reversal of the board's vote. She must realize she can't. But she's tightening the foundation's budget and imposing strict reporting requirements. She's basically hoping we'll get bogged down in red tape." Ruby frowned. "That's frustrating, but not surprising." Jackson nodded. "We'll work through it. This is still a step forward." He managed a tired smile. "Henry also said Teresa's worried about negative PR if she openly destroys the scholarship plan. It seems our victory is forcing her to be cautious." She reached for his hand. "That's a small win in itself." They tidied up their papers, dividing tasks. Ruby would gather testimonials from community members who benefited from scholarships, while Jackson formalized the partnership deals Henry had started negotiating. As they prepared to leave, Ruby felt a subtle shift in the air, an unspoken closeness between them that went beyond shared goals. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting bright beams onto the pavement. Pedestrians wove around them as they lingered on the sidewalk. Jackson glanced at the neat stack of papers under his arm. "We're going to turn these documents into something that changes lives," he said with quiet determination. Ruby considered how far she'd come, from a nervous waitress, terrified of losing her job, to someone standing shoulder to shoulder with a wealthy businessman, forging new possibilities for others. It was humbling, yes, but also empowering. She gave Jackson a warm smile. "Let's do it." They parted ways, each with tasks to tackle. Ruby felt energized, like she was carrying a spark that could light the way for others. She imagined her younger self, juggling double shifts and unpaid bills, never daring to dream of making such an impact. Somehow, she'd stumbled onto a path that required courage, empathy, and relentless effort. Now she wanted to help others find their own paths, too. One late afternoon, after a busy day at the diner, Ruby found a text from Jackson asking her to stop by the Harrington Foundation's new downtown office. It was located in a renovated space once used for storage, now transformed into a hub for philanthropic planning. Curious, Ruby hopped on a bus, weaving through the rush-hour crowd until she reached the address. She entered the building and followed signs to a suite labeled Harrington Foundation. The door opened onto a small reception area, furnished simply with a few chairs and a tasteful arrangement of plants. Beyond it lay a spacious main room, where half a dozen desks brimmed with files and laptops. She caught sight of Jackson, talking to someone at a desk piled high with envelopes. He spotted her and waved, finishing his conversation before crossing the room. "I'm so glad you came," he said, an excited edge in his voice. "We just got a shipment of scholarship applications. It's more than we expected for our initial pilot program." Her gaze swept over the neatly stacked folders. "All these are from people hoping for a chance." Jackson nodded, leading her to a desk near the back wall. "Yeah, from high school seniors, community college transfers, even a few older adults returning to school. It's inspiring and a bit overwhelming." Ruby flipped open the top folder, skimming a heartfelt letter from a young single mother determined to become a nurse. It reminded her of Ashley, the close call at the lake, the desperate need for financial help. Warmth filled her chest, mingling with pride. "This is exactly why you fought so hard." A clatter at the door drew their attention. Linda walked in, carrying 2 boxes of office supplies. She set them down, wiping her brow. "Don't mind me," she huffed, "just volunteering a little time after my morning shift. Jackson asked if I could help sort these applications." Ruby grinned. Seeing Linda in this new setting felt surreal, but also right. She hurried over to take one of the boxes. "Thanks for pitching in." Linda shrugged, though her eyes gleamed. "I started life dreaming of being a chef in some fancy place, but I ended up in different kitchens, different paths. Now, if I can help someone else chase their dream, why not?" They spent the next hour opening envelopes, scanning forms, and sorting them into categories. Occasionally, Linda read aloud a particularly moving line from an essay. Jackson typed notes on his laptop, brainstorming how best to expand the foundation's reach. Despite the quiet hum of work, an undercurrent of hope permeated the air. Each application embodied a life waiting to change. Partway through, Henry arrived. He gave Ruby and Linda a friendly nod, then conferred with Jackson about upcoming meetings. Though they spoke in low tones, Ruby caught snippets. Teresa was still being difficult, insisting on monthly reports, complaining about unnecessary expenses. Yet Henry seemed determined, forging ahead with or without her cooperation. Eventually, Henry approached Ruby. "We've set aside some scholarship funds specifically for non-traditional students," he said. "People like yourself who had to juggle jobs and family. If you're interested in pursuing further education, I'd be happy to sponsor you." Ruby's eyes widened. "Me? Wow! I never thought about going back to school. I've been so focused on keeping afloat, paying bills." Henry offered a kind smile. "Well, think it over. You've proven you have the drive to make a difference. If that's something you want, I'll see what we can do." Touched, Ruby could hardly find her voice. She thanked him, mind spinning at the idea of enrolling in classes she'd once dismissed as impossible, maybe business courses or even non-profit management, so she could continue helping others on a grander scale. For the moment, though, she shelved the notion, focusing on the tasks at hand. They worked into the early evening, the stack of applications sorted into neat piles. As Linda gathered her things to leave, she gave Ruby a conspiratorial wink. "Remember, life's full of second chances. Don't be afraid to grab one." When Linda was gone, only Ruby and Jackson remained. They stood by the large windows, looking down at the city lights blinking to life in the twilight. The hush of the nearly empty office felt comforting, almost sacred. Jackson turned to Ruby, his expression reflecting both gratitude and a quiet awe. "I never imagined this office buzzing with people who genuinely care. For so long, my family's resources were poured into deals, not dreams, but now—" Ruby finished the sentence in her own words. "Now you're investing in people, not just profits." He smiled. "Exactly." Then he reached for her hands, drawing her closer. "I also never imagined finding someone who would push me to break free from the shadows of my family's influence. Your bravery that night in the restaurant, kissing me in front of everyone, changed everything." She laughed softly, recalling that impulsive moment. "I thought I'd lose my job, maybe even get sued." He squeezed her hands, looking into her eyes with a sincerity that stole her breath. "Instead, it brought us here, forging a path neither of us could have walked alone." For a few heartbeats, they stood there, letting the weight of their journey settle. She remembered the initial fear, the heated clashes, the uncertain victories. The scholarship applications on the desks behind them were living proof that a single act of courage could ripple out in unimaginable ways. When Jackson finally spoke, his voice was husky with emotion. "There's so much more to do, but I'm ready for it, as long as we face it together." Ruby's heart fluttered. She thought of Ashley, healthy and studying, her mother receiving proper care, and the countless families who might soon benefit from these scholarships. The road was far from smooth, but for the first time, hope felt more powerful than fear. Leaning against the window's ledge, she rested her head on Jackson's shoulder, eyes fixed on the city below. Together, she echoed, letting that single word capture her trust in him. And in the future they were building, one bold step at a time. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.